Elena Carter never imagined her wedding day would arrive in chains. Standing at the altar in a borrowed dress, she faced Victor Romano, a man whose name made seasoned criminals weep. Her father's gambling debt had bought her this, a forced marriage to Boston's most ruthless mafia boss. The church was silent except for Victor's cold voice reciting vows that felt like a death sentence. Outside, armed men guaranteed no escape. Inside, Victor's dark eyes promised a future she couldn't fathom. This wasn't love. This was payment, and Elena had just become the most valuable commodity in the underworld. If you want to see how Elena survives her first night as a mafia wife, stay until the end. Like this video and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. What? The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and the kind of grief that seeped into walls. Elena Carter sat outside the ICU, her nursing scrubs still damp from where she'd tried to clean her father's blood off her hands 3 hours earlier. The doctors had done everything they could. Thomas Carter's heart had simply given out, a massive coronary that struck him down in the middle of his favorite poker room. Elena had always known her father gambled. What she hadn't known was how badly. "Miss Carter?" The voice belonged to a man in an expensive charcoal suit, his appearance so out of place in the fluorescent-lit waiting room that several nurses turned to stare. He was young, maybe 30, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested money and danger in equal measure. Elena looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. "Yes?" "My name is Marcus Chen. I represent certain business interests that had dealings with your father." He didn't sit down, didn't offer condolences. His hands remained at his sides, but Elena noticed the bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. "We need to discuss his outstanding obligations." The word obligations landed like a stone in her stomach. "My father's dead," Elena said quietly. "Whatever debts he had died with him." Marcus's expression didn't change. "I'm afraid that's not how it works, Miss Carter. Your father owed a significant sum to Mr. Victor Romano. That debt transfers to his estate, which means it transfers to you." Elena's throat went dry. Even in her sheltered world of textbooks and 12-hour nursing shifts, she'd heard the name Victor Romano. Everyone in Boston had. He was the shadow that made politicians nervous and rival crime families disappear. The Romano family controlled everything from the waterfront to the state legislature, and Victor Romano controlled the Romano family with an iron fist wrapped in expensive Italian leather. "How much?" The question felt like swallowing glass. $240,000. Marcus delivered the number with the same inflection he might use to discuss the weather. "Plus interest." Elena's vision swam. She made $32,000 a year as a nursing student working part-time at Mass General. Her father's apartment was rented. His car was leased. There was no estate, just an aging man's collection of disappointments and the daughter who'd tried to save him from himself. "I don't have that kind of money," Elena whispered. "We're aware." Marcus reached into his jacket. Elena tensed and withdrew a cream-colored envelope. "Mr. Romano is prepared to forgive the debt entirely, under one condition." Elena's hands trembled as she took the envelope. Inside was a single card, heavy stock with embossed lettering, an invitation, but not to a funeral, a wedding, her wedding, to Victor Romano, in 3 days. "This is insane," Elena's voice cracked. "You can't. This isn't legal. You can't force someone to marry." "We're not forcing anything, Miss Carter." Marcus's tone remained professionally neutral. "You have a choice. Pay the debt within 30 days or accept Mr. Romano's generous offer. If you choose neither, well," he let the sentence hang, and Elena understood perfectly what lived in that silence. She thought of the stories she'd heard whispered in hospital break rooms, bodies found in the harbor, businesses that burned down when owners couldn't pay protection money, women who disappeared when they crossed the wrong people. Why? The question escaped before Elena could stop it. Why would someone like Victor Romano want to marry someone like me? For the first time, something almost like sympathy flickered across Marcus's face. "That's a question you'll have to ask Mr. Romano yourself. The wedding is scheduled for Saturday at St. Augustine's, 10 a.m. A car will collect you at 8:30. He turned to leave, then paused. "If you run, Miss Carter, Understand that we will find you. And Mr. Romano is far more patient with people who don't waste his time." Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with a wedding invitation that felt like a death warrant. The next 3 days passed in a blur of numb disbelief. Elena went through the motions, filed paperwork at the hospital, attended her father's small funeral, packed up his apartment under the watchful eyes of 2 men in dark SUVs who never spoke but never left. She searched for escape routes that didn't exist. She had no family beyond the father she'd just buried, no savings beyond $3,000 in a checking account, nowhere to run that Victor Romano's reach wouldn't find her. On Friday night, a package arrived at her apartment. Inside the black box was a wedding dress, simple, elegant, clearly expensive. Cream silk that would fit her perfectly. They'd known her measurements. They'd been watching her closely enough to know exactly what size she wore. The realization made Elena's skin crawl. Beneath the dress was a note in sharp, masculine handwriting. "Wear this tomorrow. Bring nothing else. Everything you need will be provided." Elena didn't sleep that night. She sat by her window, watching the street below where one of the dark SUVs remained parked, a constant reminder that her choices had run out. She thought about her mother, dead from cancer when Elena was 12. She thought about the nursing degree she'd been 6 months from completing. She thought about the future she'd imagined, simple, quiet, dedicated to helping people heal. All of it was gone now, replaced by a wedding to a man she'd never met, a man whose reputation was built on violence and fear. The car arrived exactly at 8:30. Elena wore the dress because she had no other option. Her dark hair pulled back in a simple twist, no makeup because her hand shook too badly to apply it. She carried nothing. What was the point? Wherever Victor Romano was taking her, she doubted her old life's possessions would be welcome. The driver was silent, professional. The car was a black Mercedes with tinted windows that turned Boston's morning streets into a shadowy blur. They drove for 20 minutes, leaving the city proper for an older neighborhood where stone churches stood alongside narrow streets lined with brownstones. St. Augustine's was beautiful in an old-world way, all Gothic arches and stained glass that caught the morning sun. But the beauty felt like a mockery as the car pulled to the curb and the driver opened her door. "This way, Miss Carter." 2 more men in suits waited at the church entrance. Not guests, guards. Elena's legs felt like water as she climbed the stone steps, each footfall bringing her closer to a future she couldn't fathom. Inside, the church was nearly empty. A handful of people sat in the front pews, hard-faced men in expensive suits, women whose jewelry probably cost more than Elena's entire education. No friends, no family. This wasn't a celebration. It was a transaction. And at the altar, waiting with his hands clasped behind his back, stood Victor Romano. Elena's breath caught. She'd expected a monster, someone whose appearance matched the darkness of his reputation, scarred, brutal, marked by the violence he commanded. Instead, Victor Romano looked like he could have stepped from the pages of a fashion magazine. Tall and lean, with broad shoulders that filled out his black Tom Ford suit perfectly. Dark hair cut precisely, just long enough to hint at a wave. Sharp cheekbones and a jaw that could cut glass. But it was his eyes that stopped Elena cold. Dark brown, almost black, they tracked her movement down the aisle with an intensity that made her feel like prey being measured by a predator. Not cruel exactly, but utterly focused, completely in control. This was a man who had never heard the word no and lived in a world where his desires became reality through sheer force of will. Elena reached the altar on legs that barely held her. Up close, she could see Victor was younger than she'd expected, maybe 32, 33. His face was devastatingly handsome, the kind of masculine beauty that probably made most women forget to breathe. But there was no warmth in those dark eyes, no kindness, just an assessment so thorough Elena felt stripped bare. "Elena Carter." His voice was deep, cultured, with the faintest trace of an Italian accent. Not a question, a statement of possession. "Mr. Romano." Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Victor." He said it like a correction, like she'd already made a mistake. "We're about to be married. I think we can dispense with formalities." A priest appeared, elderly, nervous, clearly uncomfortable with whatever forces had brought him here. Elena wondered if he was being paid or threatened, probably both. Shall we begin? Victor asked, though it wasn't really a question. The ceremony was brief, stripped of anything that might suggest joy or celebration. The priest rushed through the words, stumbling over passages about love and devotion that felt obscene under the circumstances. Elena's responses came automatically, her voice distant in her own ears. When the priest asked for rings, Victor produced a simple platinum band that he slid onto Elena's finger with fingers that were surprisingly gentle. The ring fit perfectly. Of course it did. These people knew everything about her. The groom may kiss the bride. Elena's heart hammered as Victor stepped closer, one hand lifting to cup her jaw. His touch was warm, his palm calloused in a way that suggested he was more than just a man who gave orders from behind a desk. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and Elena saw something flicker in those dark eyes, something almost like hesitation. Then his mouth touched hers, and the world narrowed to that single point of contact. The kiss was soft, restrained, nothing like the brutal claiming Elena had expected. Just a gentle pressure that lasted perhaps 3 seconds before Victor pulled back, his eyes searching her face for something she didn't understand. "It's done," he said quietly. Not to her, to the room. And just like that, Elena Carter became Elena Romano, property of a man she didn't know, bound by vows that felt like chains. The reception, if it could be called that, took place in a private room at an exclusive restaurant Elena had walked past 100 times but never dreamed of entering. The space was elegant, all dark wood and soft lighting, with a view of Boston Harbor that would have been romantic under any other circumstances. Elena sat at the head table, untouched food in front of her, while Victor's associates offered toasts that sounded more like business reports. She watched her new husband move through the room, accepting congratulations from dangerous-looking men, speaking in low tones with lieutenants who treated every word like a commandment. He never smiled, never laughed, controlled every interaction with the precision of a master tactician. "You're not eating," Victor's voice came from beside her, startling Elena from her daze. He'd returned to his seat without her noticing, moving with the silent grace of a predator. "I'm not hungry." Truth. The knot in her stomach made the thought of food nauseating. Victor studied her for a long moment. Understandable. This isn't the wedding day most women dream of. The casual acknowledgement of the horror he'd orchestrated made something snap in Elena's chest. She turned to face him fully, meeting those dark eyes with a courage born of having nothing left to lose. "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. "Why me? You could have just taken the money from my father's estate, or made me work it off, or—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the darker alternatives that surely would have been easier than this. Victor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He leaned back in his chair, one arm draped casually over the back of Elena's seat, in a gesture that looked possessive to anyone watching. "Your father made bad decisions," Victor said quietly. "But you tried to save him anyway, worked 2 jobs to pay his debts, kept him housed when he gambled away his rent money. You gave blood when he needed transfusions after a bar fight. You're a nursing student. You heal people. In my world, that kind of goodness is—" He paused, searching for the word. "Rare." Elena's throat tightened. "So you decided to own it?" "I decided to protect it." Victor's hand moved to her shoulder, his touch light but unmistakable. "This world I live in, it destroys good things, Elena. Grinds them down until there's nothing left but cynicism and survival. I've spent my entire life watching beauty turn ugly, watching hope die. And then I saw you." "You've been watching me?" The violation of it made Elena's skin crawl. "For 2 years. No shame in the admission. Since your father first borrowed money from my organization, I saw you visiting him, trying to keep him together. Saw you at the hospital, exhausted from double shifts, but still stopping to help an elderly patient who wasn't even your responsibility. You're everything this world isn't, Elena, and I want—" He stopped himself, jaw tightening. "I need that close to me. You forced me into this." Elena's voice shook with suppressed rage. "You blackmailed me with my father's debt. You gave me no choice. That's not protection, Victor. That's possession." "Yes." Simple, direct, completely unapologetic. I took your choice because I was afraid you'd choose to run, and I couldn't let that happen. The honesty was somehow worse than a lie would have been. Elena stared at this beautiful, terrible man who had just turned her life into a cage and called it safety. I will never forgive you for this, she whispered. Victor's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened fractionally on her shoulder. I know, but you'll be safe. And for now, that's enough. The estate was an hour outside Boston, hidden behind stone walls and electronic gates that screamed both wealth and paranoia. The house itself was a sprawling modern masterpiece, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that somehow still felt like a fortress. Elena counted at least a dozen security cameras on the drive up, not to mention the armed guards stationed at intervals around the perimeter. Victor's prison was beautiful. That made it worse somehow. The car stopped at the main entrance, where a woman in her 60s waited with the kind of composed efficiency that suggested she'd been running this household for decades. Elena, this is Mrs. Chen, Victor said, coming around to open her door himself. She manages the house. Anything you need, ask her. Welcome, Mrs. Romano. Mrs. Chen's greeting was warm, professional, utterly at odds with the circumstances. I've prepared the East Wing for you, if you'll follow me. The East Wing. Elena's mind caught on that detail. Not our wing, not the master bedroom. Separate quarters. The space Mrs. Chen showed her was stunning, a suite larger than Elena's entire previous apartment, decorated in soft grays and creams with furniture that probably cost more than a car. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens. An ensuite bathroom featured a soaking tub that could fit 3 people. The walk-in closet already held clothes. Expensive, all inner size, tags still on. Mr. Romano had these selected for you, Mrs. Chen explained, noticing Elena's stare. If anything doesn't fit or suit your taste, just let me know, and we'll have them replaced. Elena ran her fingers over silk blouses and cashmere sweaters, designer jeans and elegant dresses. A wardrobe curated by strangers who'd studied her measurements and style. It felt like being dressed up as someone else's doll. Where will Victor sleep? Elena asked. Mrs. Chen's expression remained neutral. Mr. Romano's quarters are in the West Wing. You'll have complete privacy here. So, separate bedrooms. Despite being married, despite Victor's talk of keeping her close, he apparently had no intention of actually touching her. Elena couldn't decide if she was relieved or insulted. Dinner is at 7, Mrs. Chen continued, though Mr. Romano often works late. You're free to explore the grounds, use any of the facilities. The gym, the pool, the library, consider everything yours. The only rule is that you don't leave the property without security. Without a guard, she meant. Without a keeper. Am I a prisoner? Elena asked bluntly. Mrs. Chen's expression softened. You're Mr. Romano's wife, which means you're the most protected person in Massachusetts, but also the most watched. She moved toward the door, then paused. He's not a cruel man, Mrs. Romano. Hard, yes. Dangerous, absolutely, but not cruel. Give him a chance to prove that. Then she was gone, leaving Elena alone in her gilded cage. Elena didn't go down for dinner. She couldn't face Victor again so soon, couldn't sit across from him and pretend this was normal. Instead, she stood at the window, watching the sun set over grounds that stretched to a tree line she couldn't even see the end of. Somewhere beyond those walls was her old life, her apartment, her job, her dreams of graduating and maybe one day making a real difference in people's lives. All of it was gone now, replaced by designer clothes and security cameras and a husband who'd stalked her for 2 years before buying her like property. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Elena tensed, but it wasn't Victor who entered when she called out a tentative, "Come in." It was Mrs. Chen carrying a covered tray. "You missed dinner," the older woman said gently. "I thought you might be hungry." The tray held simple comfort food, tomato soup, grilled cheese, fresh fruit, the kind of meal that suggested someone had asked what Elena might actually want, rather than imposing gourmet cuisine she didn't ask for. "Did Victor send you?" Elena asked. "Mr. Romano noticed your absence. He asked me to make sure you ate something." Mrs. Chen set the tray on the small table by the window. He's in his study if you'd like to speak with him. I don't. Mrs. Chen nodded, unsurprised. He said you'd probably say that. He also said to tell you that this wing is yours completely. He won't enter without permission. You have privacy and safety here. Those are his promises to you. Privacy and safety. As if those could make up for freedom. After Mrs. Chen left, Elena ate mechanically, the food tasteless despite clearly being well prepared. She showered in the enormous bathroom, changed into silk pajamas that had appeared in her drawers, perfectly sized, of course, and lay in the king-size bed that felt cavernous and empty. Sleep didn't come. Elena stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her. Somewhere in another wing, Victor Romano was probably working, making decisions that affected lives and fortunes, ruling his criminal empire with the same absolute control he'd applied to stealing her life. She thought about running. Getting out somehow, disappearing into a city large enough to hide in. But she'd seen the security, seen the guards, and she'd heard the stories about what happened to people who crossed the Romano family. No, running wasn't an option, which meant surviving was. Elena turned on her side, pulling the expensive sheets up to her chin. The ring on her finger caught the moonlight, platinum and perfect and completely unwanted. A symbol of ownership she hadn't chosen but couldn't escape. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine a future where this got better, where the beautiful, dangerous man who'd forced her into this might somehow become something other than her jailer. But imagination had limits, and right now, lying in the darkness of her first night as Mrs. Victor Romano, Elena could only see walls. Beautiful, carefully constructed walls. A prison was still a prison, no matter how expensive the furniture. The next morning, Elena woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to cover, and the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside her suite. She dressed quickly in jeans and a simple sweater from the closet, clothes she'd never chosen but that fit perfectly, and ventured out to explore her new cage. The house was even larger than she'd realized. The East Wing alone had 6 bedrooms, a sitting room, and a private office she suspected had been set up for her, though she couldn't imagine what she'd use it for. The main floor featured a chef's kitchen where Mrs. Chen was directing 2 younger women in meal prep, a formal dining room that could seat 20, and a casual living space with comfortable furniture and a fireplace that probably hadn't been lit in years. But it was the library that stopped Elena in her tracks. The room was 2 stories tall, lined floor to ceiling with books, leather-bound classics, modern hardcovers, medical texts, novels in multiple languages. There was a rolling ladder for the higher shelves and comfortable chairs positioned near windows that overlooked the gardens. It smelled of old paper and leather, and the kind of quiet wealth that accumulated knowledge the way other people accumulated things. Elena ran her fingers along the spines, recognizing titles from her literature classes, from recommendations she'd never had time to follow up on. Someone had built this collection with care, with actual love of reading, not just as decoration. You found it. Elena spun around. Victor stood in the doorway dressed more casually than yesterday, in dark slacks and a black sweater that emphasized his lean frame. His hair was slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked tired, still devastatingly handsome, but tired. I didn't mean to intrude, Elena said automatically. You're not intruding. This is your home now. Victor stepped into the library, his eyes scanning the shelves with obvious familiarity. I had them stock it with medical texts when I learned about your nursing studies. The collection of modern literature is Mrs. Chen's doing. She's convinced I need to read something published after 1950. Elena's throat tightened. He'd had them stock medical texts. For her. Because he'd been planning this, preparing for her, creating a life he intended to trap her in. I don't want to be here, she said quietly. I know. Victor's expression didn't change. But you are here, and we both need to find a way to make that bearable. Bearable? Elena laughed, the sound brittle. You stole my life, Victor, my education, my career, my future. You forced me into a marriage I never wanted with a man I don't know, and you think the answer is making it bearable? Victor was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her with that same unsettling intensity from yesterday. When he spoke, his voice was soft but firm. You want to finish your nursing degree? Elena blinked, thrown by the question. What? Your education. You were 6 months from graduating, yes? From getting your RN license? Victor pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. Consider it done. I'll have someone contact the university today. You can complete your coursework remotely, do your clinical hours at Mass General under supervision. You'll graduate on schedule. You can't just, I can. Simple. Absolute. I can do almost anything, Elena. That's what you don't understand yet. Money and power remove most obstacles. If you want to be a nurse, you'll be a nurse. If you want to work at a hospital, you'll work at a hospital. You'll just do it with security following you. You'll do it as my wife. Elena stared at him, trying to process this. Why would you do that? Because making you miserable serves no purpose. Victor slipped his phone back into his pocket. I want you here, Elena, in my home, in my life. But I don't want to break you in the process. So tell me what you need to be less miserable, and if it's within my power to give it to you, I will. It was a cage, Elena realized, but he was offering to make it a larger cage, to give her back pieces of the life he'd stolen, as long as she accepted that she'd be living that life under his control. I need you to let me go, Elena whispered. I need to not be married to a stranger who terrifies me. Pain flashed across Victor's face, brief, quickly controlled, but unmistakable. That's the one thing I can't give you. Then we have nothing to talk about. Elena moved toward the door, but Victor's voice stopped her. Elena? She didn't turn around. You'll have everything you need to complete your degree delivered by tomorrow. Classes start remotely next week. And there's a gym on the lower level. I know you used to run before work. The treadmills have screens. You can simulate outdoor routes if that helps. He'd been watching her, studying her routines, her habits. The violation of it made Elena's skin crawl, even as part of her recognized the strange consideration in the gesture. Why? She asked, still not facing him. Why does any of this matter to you? Because you matter to me. Victor's voice was closer now. He'd moved toward her without making a sound. I know you don't believe that. I know you think this is about possession or control or some kind of twisted power game. Maybe it is, partially. But Elena? He paused, and she could feel him just behind her, close enough that his warmth radiated against her back. In 2 years of watching you, I never saw you be cruel to anyone. Not once. Not even when you had every right to be. You're kind in a world that punishes kindness. You're good in a way I'd forgotten existed. And yes, I took your choice. I forced you into this. But I did it because I'm selfish enough to want that goodness close to me, even if it means you hate me for it. Elena's hands clenched at her sides. You don't get to call this protection. You don't get to dress up kidnapping as caring. No, Victor agreed quietly. I don't, but it doesn't make it any less true. He moved away then, his footsteps soft on the library's hardwood floor. At the door, he paused. Breakfast is at 8 if you want to join me. If you'd rather eat alone, Mrs. Chen will bring you something. The choice is yours. Then he was gone, leaving Elena standing alone among thousands of books, her chest tight with anger and confusion, and something she didn't want to name. Because the terrible thing, the thing that scared her most, was that part of her had heard the truth in Victor Romano's voice. Part of her had recognized genuine feeling beneath the calm control, which meant her prison wasn't as simple as she'd wanted to believe. And her jailer might be as trapped in this as she was, just in a completely different cage. Elena didn't go to breakfast that first morning, or the morning after that. She stayed in her wing, exploring the boundaries of her new existence like an animal testing the limits of its enclosure. The gym Victor mentioned became her refuge. She ran on the treadmill until her legs burned and her mind went blissfully blank, the simulated outdoor routes a cruel reminder of a freedom she no longer possessed. Mrs. Chen brought meals on covered trays, always perfectly timed, always exactly what Elena might have chosen if given the option. It was considerate and suffocating in equal measure. The older woman never pushed conversation, just offered quiet presence and the kind of gentle understanding that made Elena's throat tight with unexpected emotion. On the fourth day, a delivery arrived. 3 large boxes wheeled into her suite by men who wouldn't meet her eyes. Inside were textbooks, a new laptop already configured with her university portal login, and a tablet loaded with her course syllabi. True to his word, Victor had arranged everything. Elena's professors had been contacted, her clinical rotations rescheduled, her incomplete semester transformed into a remote completion program that would let her graduate on time. She should have been grateful. Instead, she felt the cage walls closing in tighter. Because this wasn't kindness, it was control dressed up in consideration. Victor was proving a point, that he could give her what she wanted, could make her life comfortable, could provide everything except the one thing that mattered, her freedom. Elena threw herself into her coursework with desperate focus. Pharmacology, pathophysiology, advanced patient care. The familiar material became an anchor to who she'd been before Victor Romano had forced his way into her life. She studied at the desk in her suite, took notes until her hand cramped, reviewed case studies until the words blurred together. Anything to avoid thinking about the man in the West Wing who'd bought her like property and called it protection. But avoidance had limits in a house where every corner carried reminders of her new reality. The expensive clothes in her closet. The platinum band on her finger that she couldn't bring herself to remove. The security guards whose positions she'd mapped within 2 days. 6 on the perimeter, 2 at the main gate, 1 stationed discreetly near the East Wing entrance. Always watching. Always there. On the 7th night of her marriage, Elena woke from a nightmare she couldn't quite remember, her heart hammering and sheets tangled around her legs. The bedside clock read 2:17 a.m. The house was silent around her, that particular quality of quiet that came from too much space and too few people. She couldn't stay in bed. The walls felt too close despite the suite's generous size. Elena pulled on a robe, silk, expensive, not hers but somehow hers now, and slipped into the hallway. The house at night was different. Shadows pooled in corners, and the minimal security lighting created pockets of darkness between patches of illumination. Elena moved through the main floor on bare feet, trailing her fingers along walls that probably cost more than most people's houses. She ended up in the library again, drawn by some instinct she didn't question. The room felt safer somehow, all those books representing worlds beyond these walls. Elena curled into one of the leather chairs, pulling her knees to her chest, and stared out at the moonlit gardens. "Can't sleep?" Elena gasped, spinning toward the voice. Victor emerged from the shadows near the far bookshelf, a tumbler of amber liquid in one hand and dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd been awake for hours. He wore black pajama pants and a t-shirt that revealed lean, muscled arms, the first time Elena had seen him in anything approaching casual. "I didn't know anyone was here," Elena said, her voice sharp with residual adrenaline. "I come down here sometimes when I can't turn my brain off." Victor moved to the chair opposite hers, settling into it with the kind of exhausted grace that suggested this was a familiar ritual. "The books help. Remind me there are worlds beyond the one I live in." Elena studied him in the dim light. Without the armor of his expensive suits, Victor looked younger, more human, the kind of tired that went bone deep, carved into the lines around his eyes and the set of his shoulders. "What keeps you awake?" she asked before she could stop herself. Victor's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Business. Decisions that affect hundreds of lives. Enemies who'd kill me if they found an opening. The usual." He took a sip of his drink. Whiskey, probably. Something expensive and old. And lately, a wife who won't speak to me. "I'm speaking to you now." "You're tolerating my presence because I startled you in a room you thought was empty. That's not the same thing." Victor's dark eyes studied her with that unnerving intensity. "You've been avoiding me for a week. You said I had privacy in the East Wing. You do. I haven't set foot in your suite since you moved in." Victor leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. "But I notice things, Elena. I notice you eat alone, study alone, use the gym at hours when you know I'll be working. You're living in my house like a ghost, trying not to be seen." "What did you expect?" Elena's hands tightened on her knees. "That I'd just accept this? Play happy housewife while you run your criminal empire?" "I expected exactly what I'm getting. Anger, resentment, fear." Victor's voice remained calm, matter of fact. "What I'm trying to figure out is whether we stay locked in this pattern forever or whether there's a way through it to something bearable." There you go again with bearable. Elena stood abruptly, unable to sit still under his scrutiny. As if that's the best I can hope for. A bearable existence in a beautiful prison married to a man who terrifies me. Do I? Victor asked quietly. Terrify you? Elena turned to face him fully. Yes. You have people killed, Victor. You controlled drug traffic and gambling and protection rackets. You forced me into marriage by threatening my life if I refused. So yes, you absolutely terrify me. Victor set his glass down carefully on the side table. When he stood, Elena's instinct was to step back, but she forced herself to hold her ground. He moved closer, not threatening, just erasing the distance between them until he was near enough that she could see gold flecks in his dark eyes. I've never killed anyone who didn't pose a threat to my family or my business, Victor said, his voice low and controlled. I don't deal drugs. That's a line I won't cross. The gambling and protection are real, yes. I won't lie to you about what I am, but Elena... He lifted one hand and she tensed, but all he did was brush his fingers against her cheek, the touch feather light. I would cut off my own hand before I hurt you. You're the one thing in this entire world I have no intention of breaking. Elena's breath caught. Up close like this, she could see the exhaustion etched in Victor's face, the tension he carried in his jaw, the way his eyes tracked her expression like he was searching for something specific and terrified he wouldn't find it. Then let me go, she whispered. Victor's hand dropped away. I can't. You mean you won't? No, I mean I can't. Victor stepped back, creating distance again, his expression shuddering. Because letting you go means you'd leave. Go back to your apartment, your hospital shifts, your normal life. And that normal life has already been noticed by my enemies. You became a target the moment your father borrowed money from my organization. If I let you go now, you'd be dead within a month, kidnapped and used against me, or killed to send me a message. So no, Elena, I can't let you go. Even if I wanted to. The words landed like stones in Elena's stomach. You're saying I was never safe, even before you forced this marriage. Your father's debts put you on a radar you didn't know existed. Victor's voice carried a weight of something that might have been regret. When he died, that debt transferred to you. If it hadn't been me, it would have been one of the other families. And they wouldn't have offered marriage. They would have offered you to their soldiers, or sold you overseas, or simply killed you to make the debt go away. Elena's legs felt weak. She sank back into the chair, her mind reeling. So this was, what? A rescue? This was me taking what I wanted and telling myself it was also the right thing to do. Victor's honesty was brutal, unflinching. I'm not a good man, Elena. I won't pretend otherwise. But I am a man who protects what's his. And whether you wanted it or not, you became mine 2 years ago when I first saw you defending your father to a loan shark in a hospital parking lot. The memory surfaced unbidden. Elena confronting a man twice her size, demanding he leave her father alone, her hands shaking but her voice steady. She'd been terrified but determined, too stubborn to back down even when she should have run. You were there? Elena asked. I was the loan shark. Victor's mouth twisted. Or rather, I'd come to discuss terms with him. You stepped between us like a guardian angel in Scrubs, and I thought you were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Turned out to be both. Elena didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So you've been stalking me for 2 years because I yelled at you in a parking lot? I've been watching over you for 2 years because you showed me something I'd forgotten existed. Victor moved back to his chair, retrieving his whiskey. Courage without calculation. Kindness without agenda. You weren't trying to manipulate or impress anyone. You were just trying to save someone you loved, even though he'd never deserved you. My father was a good man who made bad choices, Elena said quietly. Your father was a weak man who hid behind his daughter's strength. Victor's assessment was harsh, but not cruel, just factual. He knew what owing money to my family meant. He knew the danger he was putting you in, and he kept gambling anyway, kept borrowing, kept believing his luck would turn. That's not love, Elena. That's selfishness. The truth of it stung because Elena had thought the same thing 100 times, but never let herself fully acknowledge it. Her father had loved her in his way, but he'd loved gambling more. Loved the thrill, the possibility, the escape it offered from disappointment. "He was all I had," she whispered. "I know." Victor's voice softened fractionally. "And now he's gone. And you're here. And you hate me for it. I understand that. But Elena, whether you believe me or not, you're safer in this house than you've been since your father first borrowed money from my organization. The security, the guards, the walls, they're not just to keep you in. They're to keep everyone else out." Elena looked at him sitting there, this beautiful, dangerous man who destroyed her life and called it salvation. Part of her wanted to rage at him, to throw her anger like weapons until he understood the magnitude of what he'd taken. But another part, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, heard the truth in his words, saw the exhaustion in his eyes that came from carrying burdens she couldn't begin to imagine. "I don't want to be a possession," she said finally. "I don't want to be something you protect because you've decided you own it." "Then don't be." Victor leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his dark eyes intense. "Be my wife, not in the way I forced on you, but in the way you choose. Help me understand what that looks like for you. Tell me how to do this without breaking you in the process." "I don't know if that's possible." "Neither do I, but I'd like to try." Victor stood, moving toward the library door. "Have breakfast with me tomorrow, 8 o'clock, not as prisoner and jailer, just as two people trying to figure out how to exist in the same house without making each other miserable." He left before Elena could respond, his footsteps fading into the silent house. Elena sat alone in the library for a long time after, her mind spinning with revelations she didn't know how to process. The picture Victor had painted, of enemies who'd already noticed her, of dangers that existed whether she was in this house or not, felt like the ground shifting beneath her feet. If he was telling the truth, she'd never been safe. Her normal life had been an illusion, fragile and already compromised by her father's choices. But if Victor was lying, if this was just another manipulation. Elena touched the platinum band on her finger, feeling its weight. In 7 days of marriage, Victor had given her space, privacy, the means to continue her education. He'd made promises and kept them. He watched her from a distance, but never pushed, never demanded the rights a husband might claim. It didn't make forcing the marriage right. Nothing could justify that. But it made him more complicated than the monster she'd been trying to see. And that complication terrified her far more than simple villainy ever could. The next morning, Elena stood outside the formal dining room at 7:55, her heart hammering. She'd changed clothes 3 times. First the jeans felt too casual, then a dress felt like she was trying too hard, finally settling on dark slacks and a simple blouse that felt neutral enough to not send the wrong message. Whatever the wrong message might be in a situation this surreal, Victor was already seated when she entered, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her entire previous wardrobe. But he stood when he saw her, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that felt at odds with everything she knew about him. "Elena." Her name in his voice still did strange things to her pulse. "Thank you for coming." "You said 8 o'clock." Elena moved to the chair across from him, the distance of the long table feeling safer than sitting beside him, but Victor gestured to the seat at his right instead. "Please. I'd rather not shout across furniture." Elena hesitated, then complied. Up close, she noticed details she'd missed before, a thin scar along his jawline, the calluses on his hands that suggested he did more than just give orders, the way tension lived in his shoulders like a permanent resident. Mrs. Chen appeared with coffee and what looked like a breakfast spread designed for royalty. Fresh fruit, pastries, eggs prepared 3 different ways, bacon that smelled like heaven. "I didn't know what you liked," Victor said, noticing Elena's wide-eyed stare. "So I had Mrs. Chen prepare options. This is enough food for 10 people. Then we'll have leftovers." Victor poured coffee into her cup without asking, adding cream and sugar in proportions that made Elena blink. "How did you know how I take my coffee?" Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I've watched you order it enough times. 2 sugars, cream, until it's the color of caramel." The casual admission of surveillance should have angered her. Instead, Elena found herself fascinated by the attention to detail. Victor had studied her the way most people studied for exams, thoroughly, completely, missing nothing. That's deeply unsettling, she said, but took the coffee anyway. I know. Victor served himself breakfast with economical movements. But I won't apologize for wanting to know you. They ate in silence for several minutes, Elena hyper-aware of every sound, silverware against china, the quiet rustle of Victor's movements, the way he ate with the precise manners of someone trained from childhood in formal dining. Tell me something, Elena said finally, unable to bear the quiet any longer. If you've been watching me for 2 years, what do you actually know about me? Beyond coffee orders and my class schedule. Victor set down his fork, considering the question. You volunteer at this free clinic on Tuesday nights, even though you're exhausted from your hospital shifts. You're terrible at cooking. I've seen you burn water, but you keep trying because you read somewhere that it's a useful skill. You sing off-key in your car and you don't care who hears. You cry during commercials with dogs but maintain perfect composure through medical emergencies. You're afraid of heights, but you went skydiving once on a dare because you refused to let fear control you. He paused, his dark eyes holding hers. You're lonely. You have coworkers but not friends, people you're pleasant to but don't let close. You've been taking care of your father for so long that you forgot how to let anyone take care of you. Elena's throat tightened. Every word was accurate, surgical in its precision. It should have felt violating. Instead, it felt like being seen for the first time in years. That's not knowing me, she managed. That's stalking me. It's both. It's... Victor's honesty remained unflinching. I won't pretend otherwise, but Elena, I didn't just watch your routines. I saw you. The way you stopped for every homeless person, even though you barely have money yourself. How you stayed 3 hours past your shift to hold a dying patient's hand because his family couldn't get there in time. The fact that you've been carrying the weight of your father's mistakes for years, and it never made you bitter, just tired. It made me both, Elena admitted quietly. Then you hid the bitter part better than most people could. Victor reached for his coffee, his movements controlled. You asked what I know about you. That's what I know. Not just what you do, but who you are underneath. And that's why I couldn't let you go. Elena stared at her plate, her appetite gone. You're making this very difficult. Good. I'd rather be difficult than simple. Victor's voice carried a hint of dark humor. Simple would be boring. And you, Elena Carter Romano, are many things, but boring isn't one of them. Despite everything, Elena felt her lips twitch toward a smile. She caught it, forced it down, but not before Victor noticed. His eyes lightened fractionally, something that might have been hope flickering across his features. There, he said softly. That's the first time you've almost smiled in my presence. I'll count it as progress. Don't. Elena's voice came out sharper than intended. Don't mistake tolerance for acceptance, Victor. I'm here because you've given me compelling reasons to believe I'm in danger outside these walls, not because I've forgiven you. I know. Victor's expression sobered. And I'm not asking for forgiveness, just coexistence. A truce while we figure out what this needs to be. This being our marriage? This being our lives. Because they're tangled together now, whether either of us planned it. Victor stood, retrieving something from the sideboard, a tablet that he set in front of Elena. I had my people compile threat assessments. I want you to understand what you're dealing with. What's out there? Elena looked at the screen. Files, dozens of them, each marked with names she didn't recognize and photographs of men who looked like they'd stepped from crime documentaries. Victor scrolled through them, his voice taking on a lecturing quality. The Volkov family, Russian mob, specializing in human trafficking. They've been trying to expand into my territory for 3 years. They know targeting family is the fastest way to create openings. He swiped to another file. The Chen Syndicate? Different family. No relation to Mrs. Chen. They deal in drugs I won't touch, and they've made it clear they view my refusal as weakness. They'd love nothing more than to prove it by taking something I value. More files. More faces. More organizations that existed in shadows Elena had never known were there. This is the world your father stumbled into when he borrowed money from my organization, Victor continued. These people don't forgive debts. They don't show mercy, and they certainly don't care about the innocent daughter trying to save her dying father. Elena's hands trembled as she looked at the files. How do you live like this, knowing everyone wants to destroy you? by being better at violence than they are, by controlling enough territory and resources that attacking me is suicide, by making examples of anyone stupid enough to try. Victor closed the tablet, his expression grim. And by protecting the few things I actually care about with everything I have. Is that what I am? A thing you care about? Victor's jaw tightened. You're the only thing I care about that isn't about business or survival or maintaining power. You're the one piece of my life that's supposed to be different. I didn't ask to be that. I know. Victor moved toward the dining room exit, pausing in the doorway. I have meetings most of the day, but tomorrow night, I'd like you to have dinner with me. Not breakfast where we can pretend it's casual. Actual dinner. A chance to talk beyond threat assessments and accusations. And if I say no, then I'll eat alone and try again the next night, and the night after that, for as long as it takes. Victor's dark eyes held hers. I'm a patient man when I want something, Elena, and I want you to see me as something other than your jailer. He left before she could respond, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Elena sat alone in the too large dining room, surrounded by the remnants of a breakfast that had felt like negotiation disguised as normalcy. Her coffee had gone cold, but she lifted it anyway, needing something to do with her hands. The files on the tablet drew her attention. Against her better judgment, Elena opened them again, reading through the details Victor had compiled. The scope of the criminal networks, the violence they'd committed, the casual brutality that defined their operations. And she realized with sinking certainty that Victor had been telling the truth. She'd been in danger long before he'd forced her into marriage. Her father's debts had painted a target on her back that no amount of normal life could erase. Victor hadn't saved her, but he'd given her a fighting chance at survival, even if that survival came wrapped in platinum rings and silk pajamas and a husband whose intensity made her pulse race for reasons she didn't want to examine. Elena closed the tablet and stood, her decision crystallizing. She couldn't forgive what Victor had done, but she could try to understand it, could attempt to build something bearable from the wreckage of her stolen choices. Because the alternative, spending the rest of her life at war with the man who controlled every aspect of her existence, would destroy them both. And Elena Carter had survived too much to let anger finish what her father's mistakes had started. Elena spent the afternoon in her suite studying pharmacology, but the words on the page kept blurring into Victor's face across the breakfast table. The way he'd known how she took her coffee. The casual revelation that he'd been watching her volunteer at the free clinic, sing badly in her car, live her small life completely unaware she was being catalogued by one of Boston's most dangerous men. She should have felt violated, and part of her did, but another part, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, felt something uncomfortably close to being cherished. Around 4 o'clock, Mrs. Chen knocked softly and entered carrying another covered tray. I thought you might want tea, the older woman said, setting down a service that included delicate china cups and an assortment of pastries Elena recognized from a French bakery she'd walked past 100 times but never entered. How did you know I like these? Elena asked, staring at the almond croissants. Mrs. Chen's smile was knowing. Mr. Romano is very thorough in his research. He mentioned you sometimes stopped to look in the bakery window on your way to the hospital. Of course he had. Victor probably knew her entire route to work, every shop she'd ever paused at, every small desire she'd never been able to afford. Mrs. Chen, Elena said carefully, how long have you worked for Victor? 15 years. The older woman poured tea with practiced grace. Since he was 18 and just taking over his father's business. So you've seen him build all this. The empire, the power. I've seen him survive it. Mrs. Chen's correction was gentle but firm. There's a difference between building something and simply refusing to be destroyed by it. Mr. Romano inherited a war. What he built was peace, however brutal the methods. Elena wrapped her hands around the warm teacup. You care about him. He's a good man in a terrible business. Mrs. Chen met Elena's eyes directly. I know what he did to bring you here. I'm not excusing it. But I've watched that man turn himself into a weapon to protect the people he's responsible for. He doesn't know how to be anything else. He forced me into marriage. Yes. No argument, no justification. And he'll carry that guilt for the rest of his life, even if he never shows it. But Mrs. Romano, I've worked in this house for 15 years and I've never seen him bring a woman here. Not once. His bedroom might as well be a monk's cell. He works 18-hour days and sleeps 4 hours if he's lucky. The only thing he does for himself is read in the library at night when the insomnia gets too bad. Mrs. Chen paused, her expression softening. Until you. You're the first thing he's wanted that wasn't about business or survival, the first person he's let himself need. I don't want to be needed like this. I know, dear, but sometimes we don't get to choose what finds us. Mrs. Chen moved toward the door, then turned back. Give him a chance to prove he can be more than what he had to become. That's all I'm asking. After she left, Elena sat with her tea, thinking about a young man inheriting violence and somehow forging control from chaos. About someone who lived like a weapon, but hoarded books like treasures, who watched a stranger in a parking lot defend her worthless father and saw something worth protecting for 2 years. Victor Romano was a contradiction, brutal and careful, controlling and surprisingly restrained. He'd stolen her life but seemed genuinely invested in not destroying it in the process. Elena didn't know what to do with that complexity. The next evening, she found herself standing in front of her closet at 6:30, trying to decide what to wear to dinner with her forced husband. Everything felt loaded with meaning she didn't intend. The dresses were too formal, too much like she was trying. The jeans were too casual, too dismissive. She finally settled on dark slacks and a silk blouse in deep emerald that made her dark hair and fair skin look less washed out. Not trying to impress him, she told herself, just refusing to look like a prisoner at her own dinner table. Victor was waiting in a smaller, more intimate dining room Elena hadn't seen before. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gardens, now lit with subtle landscape lighting that made the carefully tended grounds look almost magical. The table was set for 2, candles already glowing, wine breathing in a crystal decanter. He stood when she entered, and Elena's breath caught despite herself. Victor had changed from his usual suits into charcoal slacks and a black button-down with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, revealing those surprisingly muscular arms. His hair was slightly damp like he'd showered recently, and without the armor of his formal wear, he looked both more dangerous and more human. Elena. Her name again in that voice that did things to her pulse she absolutely did not want to examine. You look beautiful. Don't. The word came out sharper than intended. Don't compliment me like this is a real date. Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment quickly controlled. You're right. I apologize. He pulled out her chair, waited until she was seated before returning to his own. Thank you for coming. You did say you'd keep asking until I agreed. I meant it. Victor poured wine into her glass, a red that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to be. I can be extraordinarily persistent when properly motivated. Despite herself, Elena felt her lips twitch. Is that a threat or a promise? Both, probably. Victor's mouth curved in something that might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. I've been told I'm difficult to discourage. Mrs. Chen appeared with the first course, a butternut squash soup that smelled like autumn and comfort. Elena took a tentative spoonful and nearly groaned. It was perfect, rich and smooth with just a hint of sage. Mrs. Chen outdid herself, Victor said, watching Elena's reaction with obvious satisfaction. She's an incredible cook. She'd be pleased to hear you say that. Most of my associates care more about the wine selection than the food quality. Victor ate with the same precise manners Elena had noticed at breakfast. Tell me about your classes. How's the remote coursework going? The question surprised her. You really want to know? I wouldn't ask otherwise. Elena studied him across the candlelight, searching for mockery or manipulation. But Victor's expression remained genuinely interested, his attention focused entirely on her in a way that felt both flattering and unnerving. It's going well, she said carefully. Better than I expected, actually. My professor for advanced pharmacology is excellent at adapting lectures for remote students. And the clinical coordinator at Mass General was surprisingly accommodating about rescheduling my rotations. Surprisingly, because you expected resistance? Surprisingly, because I expected them to ask questions I couldn't answer. Elena took another spoonful of soup. How do you explain that your husband made a phone call and suddenly all your incomplete coursework became a remote completion program? Victor's expression darkened slightly. You think I threatened them? Didn't you? No. The word was flat, definitive. I made a very generous donation to the nursing program, enough to fund 3 full scholarships for students from low-income backgrounds. In exchange, they agreed to accommodate your unique circumstances. He met her eyes steadily. I don't threaten educational institutions, Elena. There are lines even I don't cross. Elena felt something shift in her chest. She'd been so ready to assume the worst, to paint Victor as a monster who bulldozed through obstacles with threats and violence. But this, using wealth to create opportunities rather than fear to demand them, suggested a more nuanced approach. 3 scholarships, she said quietly. That's generous. It's strategic. Victor's honesty remained brutal. Your nursing program now has a vested interest in your success, and 3 students who might not otherwise have had the opportunity will get their education. Everyone benefits. Except that you bought the accommodation. I bought a solution to a problem. The form that solution took was designed to cause the least harm and create the most good. Victor leaned back as Mrs. Chen cleared their soup bowls and replaced them with the main course, perfectly cooked salmon with roasted vegetables that looked like art on the plate. I won't apologize for using my resources to make your life easier, Elena. That's what having power means, using it to protect and provide for the people who matter. And I matter because you decided I do. You matter because you're extraordinary and you don't even realize it. Victor's intensity ratcheted up, his dark eyes boring into hers. Do you have any idea how rare you are? How most people in your situation would have become bitter, would have abandoned their father to his consequences, would have looked at the world's unfairness and decided kindness was a luxury they couldn't afford? I'm not extraordinary, I'm just what? Just a woman who worked 2 jobs to support a gambling addict? Just a nursing student who volunteered at free clinics on her days off? Just someone who saw a man bleeding in an alley and stopped to help even though you were late for work and it wasn't your problem? Victor's voice carried an edge of frustration. You're so busy surviving that you don't see how remarkable your refusal to become cruel actually is. Elena's throat tightened. You make me sound like some kind of saint. I'm not. I get angry. I'm resentful. I've thought terrible things about my father, about patients who waste my time, about... She stopped, unable to continue. About me? Victor finished quietly. About you most of all. Elena's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I've imagined terrible things happening to you. I've wished you'd never seen me in that parking lot. I've fantasized about running away and never looking back. Good. Victor's response startled her. That means you're human, not a saint. Anger is honest. It's the numbness I'd worry about. They ate in silence for several minutes, the weight of honesty settling between them. Elena found herself acutely aware of every small detail, the way candlelight played across Victor's features, highlighting the sharp planes of his face, the controlled grace of his movements, the tension he carried in his shoulders that never quite released. Tell me something, Elena said finally. If you could go back to that moment in the church, knowing what you know now about how I'd react, would you still force the marriage? Victor set down his fork, his expression going carefully neutral. That's not a fair question. Nothing about this situation is fair. Answer it anyway. Victor was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, like he was genuinely considering the hypothetical. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of truth that made Elena's pulse quicken. Yes, I'd still do it. Not because I don't understand the harm I caused, but because the alternative, letting you walk back into a world where you were already marked for violence, was unacceptable to me. I'd rather have you hate me and alive than free and destroyed by the wolves circling your father's debts. He paused, something almost like pain crossing his features. But I'd try harder to explain first, to give you context before I stole your choice. That's the only thing I'd change. But context wouldn't have made it right. No, but it might have made it less cruel. Victor reached for the wine, refilling both their glasses. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Elena. I'm asking you to understand that in my world, sometimes there are no good choices. only varying degrees of damage control. That's a terrible way to live. It's the only way I know how. Victor's admission was quiet, almost vulnerable. I was 18 when my father was murdered by a rival family. 18 and suddenly responsible for an organization that would have torn itself apart if I'd shown any weakness. So I learned not to show weakness, learned to make hard decisions fast, learned that caring about things made them targets. Elena's breath caught. Is that why you never married before? Because caring about someone made them vulnerable? Partly. Also because I never met anyone worth the risk. Victor's eyes found hers across the candlelight, until a woman in scrubs yelled at me in a parking lot about basic human decency. Then I spent 2 years trying to convince myself that watching over you from a distance was enough, that I could protect you without possessing you. What changed? Your father died, and suddenly you were exposed, vulnerable, and I couldn't stand at a distance anymore. Victor's hands tightened around his wine glass. I told myself I was preventing other families from claiming you, that forcing the marriage was about protection. But Elena, I think part of me was just tired of watching from the shadows, tired of wanting something I couldn't have. The raw honesty in his voice made Elena's chest ache. This was what Mrs. Chen had meant. Victor Romano didn't know how to want things like normal people. He only knew how to secure assets, eliminate threats, control variables. I'm not something you can own, Elena said quietly. I know that now. Victor met her eyes. But knowing and accepting are different things. I'm trying to learn the difference. Mrs. Chen returned to clear their plates, bringing dessert. A chocolate torte that looked sinful and perfect. But Elena barely tasted it, too aware of Victor's presence across from her, the weight of revelations hanging between them. Tell me about your family, Elena said, surprising herself. Before the violence, what were you like as a child? Victor's expression shifted, something almost like nostalgia flickering across his features. Sheltered, spoiled probably. My father tried to keep the business separate from home life. I had tutors, piano lessons, summers in Italy with my grandmother. I wanted to be an architect. He said it like a confession. Design buildings, create spaces where people could live and work and be safe. What happened? Reality. My father was killed, and suddenly the architecture degree I'd started at MIT didn't matter anymore. I came home to keep my family from being destroyed, and I never left. Victor's voice carried old grief, carefully controlled but present. Sometimes I still draw. Sketch buildings that will never exist. It's a useless skill in my current life, but I can't seem to let it go. Elena imagined a younger Victor bent over blueprints, creating instead of destroying. The image was so at odds with the man before her that it made her heart ache for futures that never happened. Show me, she said impulsively. What? Your sketches, the buildings you design. Elena leaned forward. I want to see who you were before you became this. Victor's expression closed off immediately. That's not something I share. Why not? Because it's private. Because those drawings are the one thing in my life that isn't about business or power or survival. He stood abruptly, the movement sharp. Because showing you would be giving you a weapon, and I'm not ready for that level of vulnerability. Elena stood as well, reading the sudden tension in Victor's posture. She'd pushed too far, crossed some line she didn't know existed, but instead of backing down, she moved closer, closing the distance between them until she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. I'm not your enemy, Victor. I'm your wife. Forced into it, yes, but still your wife. And if we're going to find a way to make this bearable, like you keep saying, you can't hide every piece of yourself that isn't armor. You want to see weakness? Victor's voice dropped dangerously low. You want to know what keeps me up at night beyond business decisions and security threats? Fine. I'm terrified that you'll never look at me without seeing the man who destroyed your life. I'm terrified that no matter how patient I am, how careful, how much I try to give you choices, you'll always hate me for that first choice I stole. And I'm terrified that I'm falling in love with someone who will never, could never, love me back. The words hung in the air between them, stark and raw and completely unexpected. Elena's breath caught, her heart hammering against her ribs. Victor stood frozen, like he couldn't believe he'd let those words escape, his dark eyes wide and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "Victor?" she started, but he was already moving, putting distance between them with the desperation of someone who'd revealed too much. "I apologize," he said, his voice rigid with control. "That was inappropriate. You should go." "Wait. Elena, please." Victor's back was to her now, his hands braced against the sideboard like he needed the support. "Just go. I'll see you tomorrow for breakfast if you still want to come." Elena stood there for a long moment, her mind reeling. Then slowly, carefully, she moved toward the door. But at the threshold, she paused, looking back at the man who just split himself open in front of her. "Victor?" He didn't turn around. "Yes?" "Thank you for being honest with me, even when it terrifies you." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I'm not ready to love you back. I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but I'm not ready to hate you anymore either. That has to count for something." She left before he could respond, her pulse racing and thoughts spinning. Back in her suite, Elena changed into pajamas with trembling hands, replaying Victor's confession over and over in her mind. Falling in love with someone who will never love me back. The vulnerability in those words had been devastating. The man who controlled an empire with an iron fist, who made grown criminals weep with a glance, had just admitted to being terrified of her rejection. Elena crawled into bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. She thought about the man who'd forced her into marriage, and the man who'd just confessed his fear of never being loved, about Victor the criminal and Victor the frustrated architect, the stalker and the protector, the monster and the man who knew how she took her coffee. He was a contradiction she couldn't resolve, and the most terrifying thing was that she was starting to not want to. 3 days passed in an uneasy truce. Elena continued her studies, Victor returned to his 18-hour workdays, and they maintained a careful distance that felt loaded with everything unsaid from dinner. They saw each other in passing, Victor emerging from his study as Elena headed to the gym, crossing paths in the library when Elena couldn't sleep. Each encounter was polite, controlled, carefully neutral. And each one made Elena more aware of the tension building between them like a storm-gathering force. On the 4th day, Elena made a decision. She found Victor in his study around 8 in the evening, the door slightly ajar and soft classical music drifting into the hallway. Elena knocked softly, and Victor's voice called out permission to enter without him looking up from whatever papers consumed his attention. The study was smaller than Elena expected, lined with law books and financial reports, a massive desk dominating the center of the room. But what caught her attention was the drafting table by the window, covered with architectural sketches. Victor followed her gaze and tensed immediately. "Elena, I didn't realize it was you. You said come in." She moved further into the room, drawn to the sketches despite his obvious discomfort. "May I?" Victor's jaw tightened, but after a long moment, he nodded once. The drawings were beautiful, detailed sketches of buildings that blended modern lines with classical elements, spaces designed for both functionality and grace, libraries with soaring ceilings, homes that invited light, community centers that felt welcoming rather than institutional. Each one showed incredible skill and genuine passion. "These are amazing," Elena said softly, tracing the edge of one sketch without touching it. "Victor, these are truly extraordinary. They're fantasies." His voice was tight. "Buildings that will never be built by a man who should have been an architect but became a criminal instead. You could still build them. You have the money, the resources, and zero credibility." Victor stood, moving to stand beside her at the drafting table. "Who's going to hire the mafia boss to design their library? What planning commission approves projects from someone like me? These drawings are just echoes of a life I don't get to have." Elena looked up at him, seeing the grief in his eyes for futures that died with his father. "I'm sorry that you lost that choice. We both lost choices we didn't get to make." Victor's hand moved unconsciously toward one of the sketches, then pulled back like he'd remembered she was watching. "At least I got to keep the dream, even if I can't live it." On impulse, Elena reached out and took Victor's hand, guiding it to the sketch he'd been reaching for. "Don't hide this from me, please. I need to know there's more to you than what you've had to become." Victor's fingers were warm under hers. trembling slightly as they touched the paper. Why does it matter? Because I don't want to hate you. Elena's admission surprised them both. And it's easier to see you as just a criminal, just the man who forced this marriage. But when I see these, she gestured to the sketches, to the evidence of dreams and talent and passion for creating instead of destroying. When I see these, I see someone who might have been extraordinary in a different life. I could say the same about you. Victor turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers tangling together. You would have been an incredible nurse, Elena. You still will be. But in a different life, without your father's debts, without my interference, who knows what else you might have become? They stood there in the quiet study, hands clasped, looking at sketches of buildings that would never exist. And Elena felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first fragile possibility of understanding. Victor, she said quietly. Yes? I'm scared. The truth emerged before she could stop it. I'm scared that if I let myself see you as human, as more than my captor, I'll lose the anger that's keeping me safe. And I'm scared that you'll hurt me worse than you already have, because now I'm starting to care whether you're more than what you've had to become. Victor's breath hitched. His free hand came up slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her cheek with a gentleness that made her chest ache. I would cut my own heart out before I deliberately hurt you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You're the only good thing in my life, Elena. The only part that isn't stained with blood and compromises. I would destroy myself before I'd let you be destroyed. That's what terrifies me most. Elena's eyes burned with unshed tears. Because that kind of devotion from someone like you feels like being worshipped and consumed at the same time. And I don't know how to survive it. Victor's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, catching a tear that had escaped. Then we learned together how to do this without destruction, how to be married without you becoming my possession, how to... He stopped, unable to finish. How to love without it being a weapon. Elena finished softly. Yes. The word was barely a whisper. They stood there in the amber light of the study, the classical music swelling around them. Two people trying to find solid ground in a situation neither had chosen, but both were now trapped in. And when Victor bent his head slowly, carefully, giving Elena every opportunity to pull away, she found herself rising on her toes to meet him halfway. The kiss was nothing like their wedding kiss. That had been brief, controlled, public. This was private, tentative, searching. Victor's lips were soft against hers, his hand gentle on her face, the other still tangled with her fingers. He kissed her like she was precious, like she might break, like he was terrified she'd disappear if he pushed too hard. Elena's free hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palm. The kiss deepened fractionally, Victor's control slipping just enough to show the hunger beneath his careful restraint. And Elena realized with startling clarity that this man, this dangerous, powerful, terrifying man, was completely undone by her smallest responses. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me tonight, he said quietly. Not for anything physical, just stay. Let me hold you. Let me prove I can have you close without taking more than you're ready to give. Elena's heart hammered. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that letting him this close was surrendering ground she might never reclaim. But another part, the part that had seen his sketches and heard his confession and felt his restraint, wanted to say yes. Just holding, she whispered. Just holding, Victor confirmed. You have my word. And somehow, against all logic and self-preservation, Elena believed him. Victor's bedroom was nothing like Elena expected. She'd imagined opulence, the kind of excessive luxury that screamed wealth and power. Instead, the space was almost monastic in its simplicity. A massive bed dominated the room, dressed in charcoal linens that looked expensive but understated. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gardens, currently showing nothing but darkness and reflected lamplight. A single nightstand held a lamp, a book, and reading glasses Elena hadn't known Victor needed. No photographs, no personal items, nothing that suggested this room belonged to anyone in particular. Mrs. Chen's words echoed in Elena's mind. His bedroom might as well be a monk's cell. Second thoughts? Victor asked quietly from behind her. He'd kept his distance since they'd left the study, like he was afraid any sudden movement might spook her into running. No, just surprised. Elena gestured to the sparse room. I expected something more, I don't know, elaborate? I sleep here. Sometimes. That's all this room needs to be. Victor moved to the windows, closing the heavy curtains with controlled movements. The rest of the house is for show, for hosting associates, for maintaining the image people expect. But this is just mine. And now hers too, apparently. The thought sent a shiver down Elena's spine that wasn't entirely from fear. Victor noticed. Of course he noticed. The man cataloged her every reaction like he was afraid of missing something crucial. Are you cold? I can adjust the temperature. I'm fine. Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. Just nervous. So am I. The admission surprised her. Victor moved to the far side of the bed, maintaining careful distance. I've never done this before. Elena blinked. Done what before? Had someone in my bed without expectations beyond their presence. Victor's hands moved to his shirt buttons, then paused. I can change in the bathroom if it makes you more comfortable. It's fine. Elena forced herself to stay still as Victor unbuttoned his shirt with economical movements. She'd seen men shirtless before. Working in a hospital made modesty something you learned to navigate clinically. But watching Victor reveal the lean, muscled torso beneath the expensive fabric felt anything but clinical. Scars marked his skin, a long one across his ribs that looked surgical, several smaller ones that suggested violence rather than medicine. Victor noticed her staring and his hands stilled. Occupational hazards, he said quietly. The big one is from a knife fight when I was 20. The others are various reminders that running a criminal empire comes with physical costs. Does it hurt? Elena asked before she could stop herself. Not anymore. Just aches when it rains. Victor finished unbuttoning his shirt and shrugged it off, revealing the full map of violence written across his skin. I can keep a shirt on if this bothers you. No. Elena surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. I'm a nursing student, remember? I've seen worse in the ER. This isn't the ER, and I'm not your patient. Victor's eyes held hers with that familiar intensity. I'm your husband who's asking you to sleep beside him despite every reason you have to refuse. The raw honesty in his voice made Elena's chest tight. She moved toward the bathroom, needing a moment to collect herself. I'll change. Do you have something I can wear? Victor pulled a drawer open and retrieved a t-shirt, soft, worn, clearly one of his favorites, judging by how the fabric had thinned with washing. This should work. In the bathroom, Elena changed quickly, trying not to overthink what she was doing. The t-shirt fell to mid-thigh, smelling faintly of Victor's cologne and laundry detergent. When she emerged, Victor was already in bed, propped against the pillows in black pajama pants, his chest still bare. He turned down the covers on her side. The gesture was so domestic, so normal, that it made the surreality of the situation crash over Elena again. This was her husband. The man who'd forced her into marriage was now offering her his bed with a vulnerability that felt more intimate than anything physical. Elena climbed in slowly, hyper-aware of every movement. The sheets were soft, clearly expensive, cool against her legs. She settled on her side facing Victor, keeping careful distance between them. Elena. Victor's voice was soft in the dimness. Come here, please. It wasn't a demand. It was a request carrying the weight of hope and fear in equal measure. Elena hesitated, then moved closer, letting Victor pull her against his chest. His arm came around her waist, solid and warm, his chin resting on top of her head. Is this okay? He asked, his voice rumbling through his chest against her back. Yes. Elena let herself relax fractionally into his hold. This is okay. They lay there in silence, Elena's heart gradually slowing from its frantic pace. Victor's breathing was steady behind her, his body tense despite the careful gentleness of his embrace. She could feel him fighting for control, feel the restraint it took for him to simply hold her without demanding more. Tell me something, Elena said into the darkness. Something true that you've never told anyone else. Victor's arm tightened fractionally around her waist. That's a dangerous question. We're past safe questions. A long pause. Then Victor's voice, rough with emotion. I hate what I've become. Every day I wake up and put on expensive suits and make decisions about territories and shipments and which lieutenant needs to be reminded of their loyalty. And every day I remember that 18-year-old who wanted to design buildings and believed the world could be beautiful if you just created the right spaces. He paused, his breath warm against Elena's hair. The man I am now would terrify the boy I was, and I don't know if that makes me strong or just broken beyond repair. Elena's throat tightened. She twisted in his arms until she could see his face in the dim light filtering through the curtains. Victor's expression was raw, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. You're not broken, she said softly. You're surviving. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, survival looks a lot like slow destruction. Victor's hand came up to brush hair from her face, his touch achingly gentle. Until you. You're the first thing in 15 years that's made me think survival might be worth more than just not dying. That's too much pressure to put on one person. I know. I'm sorry. Victor's thumb traced her cheekbone. I'm not good at this. At wanting things that aren't about business or control, at being vulnerable with someone who has every right to hurt me. Elena studied his face, seeing the truth written in every line of exhaustion and carefully controlled emotion. I could hurt you, couldn't I? Despite all your power and resources, I have the ability to destroy you. Yes. No hesitation. You're the only person alive who could. The admission hung between them, stark and terrifying and somehow beautiful in its honesty. Elena lifted her hand, mirroring Victor's gesture, letting her fingers trace the sharp line of his jaw. I don't want to destroy you, she whispered. I just want to understand you. Then ask me anything. I'll tell you the truth, even when it damns me. Elena thought about all the questions she'd accumulated over the past weeks. About Victor's business, his violence, the empire he controlled with such absolute authority. But in this moment, with his arm around her waist and vulnerability naked on his face, only one question mattered. Do you regret it? Forcing the marriage? Victor's eyes closed briefly, and when they opened, they carried a weight of truth that made Elena's breath catch. I regret hurting you. I regret stealing your choice. I regret every moment you've spent in this house hating me. He paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But I don't regret keeping you alive. I don't regret having you here, safe, where I can protect you. And I don't regret falling in love with you, even though I know I have no right to those feelings. You barely know me. I've known you for 2 years, Elena. I've watched you be kind when the world gave you every reason to be cruel. I've seen you give everything you had to save someone who didn't deserve your sacrifice. I've memorized the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating, the way you hum when you think no one's listening, the exact shade of determination in your eyes when you've decided something is worth fighting for. Victor's hand slid from her face to rest over her heart. I know you better than anyone alive. The question isn't whether I know you well enough to love you. It's whether you'll ever know me well enough to not be terrified by what you see. Elena's heart hammered beneath his palm. I'm not terrified right now. No? Victor's voice carried a hint of dark humor. You're in bed with a man who's killed people, Elena, who runs an organization built on violence and fear, who forced you into marriage and calls it protection. You should be terrified. Maybe I should be. But right now, all I see is someone who's more afraid of hurting me than I am of being hurt. Elena shifted closer, closing the last inches of distance between them. That has to count for something. Victor made a sound low in his throat, half groan, half laugh. You're going to ruin me completely, aren't you? Probably. Elena tucked her head beneath his chin, letting herself fully relax into his embrace. But you started it. She felt Victor's chest shake with silent laughter, his arm tightening around her waist. They lay there in the darkness, two damaged people finding unexpected comfort in proximity. And for the first time since her father's death, Elena felt something close to safe. She woke to sunlight streaming through gaps in the curtains and Victor's arm still around her waist. He was already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. Good morning, he said softly. Hi. Elena's voice was rough with sleep. Have you been awake long? A while. I didn't want to wake you. Victor's thumb traced lazy circles on her hip through the thin fabric of his t-shirt. You talk in your sleep. Elena felt heat creep up her neck. What did I say? Nothing coherent, just soft sounds like you were having a conversation with someone. Victor's expression softened. You seemed peaceful. I liked seeing that. The intimacy of the moment overwhelmed Elena. She started to pull away, needing space to process, but Victor's arm tightened fractionally. Don't, he said quietly. Not yet. Give me 5 more minutes of this before we have to go back to being careful with each other. Elena settled back against him, letting herself have this moment of normalcy in a situation that was anything but. Victor's body was warm and solid behind hers, his heartbeat steady against her back. She could feel the control it took for him to keep his touch respectful, to hold her close without demanding more. Victor? She said softly. Thank you. For keeping your word. For not pushing. Elena, I would rather cut off my own hand than break a promise I made to you. Victor pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head. Your trust is worth more than any momentary satisfaction could ever be. The next few days settled into a routine that felt almost normal. Elena continued her coursework, now joining Victor for breakfast and dinner when his schedule allowed. They talked about inconsequential things, books they'd read, movies neither had time to watch, Elena's clinical rotations and the cases that challenged her. Victor never discussed business, maintaining a careful separation between his criminal empire and the domestic space they were building together. But the truce was fragile, balanced on unspoken agreements and carefully maintained boundaries. And Elena knew with growing certainty that something would eventually shatter it. The something arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in the form of Marcus Chen appearing at the library door while Elena was studying. The tension in his posture immediately put her on alert. Mrs. Romano, I need to speak with you. Elena set down her pharmacology text. Is Victor all right? Mr. Romano is fine. He's handling a situation downtown. Marcus's expression remained professionally neutral, but Elena had learned to read the subtle tells that indicated stress. There's a man at the gate requesting entry. Says he owes Mr. Romano money and wants to negotiate payment terms. Normally, we'd handle this through standard channels, but he's brought his daughter. She's sick, maybe 6 years old, and he's begging to speak to someone with authority. Elena's nursing instincts kicked in immediately. How sick? High fever, having trouble breathing. He says they were turned away from the hospital because they don't have insurance. Marcus hesitated. Mr. Romano would handle this when he returns, but the child looks bad. I thought perhaps you might want to... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Elena was already standing, her mind shifting into the clinical detachment she'd learned in the emergency room. Bring them to the main sitting room, and get me the first aid kit from the kitchen, the comprehensive one. I'll need a thermometer, children's acetaminophen if we have it, and water. Elena paused. Does Victor know about this? Not yet. He's in a meeting that can't be interrupted. Elena made a decision that she knew might have consequences she couldn't predict. Bring them in. I'll assess the child. We can figure out the rest after. 10 minutes later, Elena knelt beside a threadbare couch where a little girl lay curled against her father's side. The man was maybe 40, worn down by life and circumstances, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and fear. The girl, Sarah, her father said her name was Sarah, had the glassy-eyed look of a child burning with fever. Elena pressed the back of her hand to Sarah's forehead and bit back a curse. The child was dangerously hot. How long has she been like this? Elena asked, pulling out the thermometer. 3 days. Started with a cough, then the fever. I tried to get her to the ER, but they said without insurance or payment up front. The man's voice broke. I owe Mr. Romano money. I know I do. I lost my job and I've been trying to pay, but I can't watch my daughter die because I made bad choices. The thermometer beeped. 104.3. Elena's training kicked in, overriding everything else. Marcus, call an ambulance. Now. Elena turned to the father. Has she had any medications today? Children's Tylenol this morning, nothing since. I'm going to give her more now to help bring the fever down, but she needs a hospital. This could be influenza, pneumonia, any number of serious infections. Elena worked as she spoke, her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She coaxed Sarah to swallow the medication, checked her breathing, her pulse, looked for signs of rash or dehydration. I can't pay for an ambulance, the man said desperately. I can't pay for anything. That's why I'm here. I was hoping Mr. Romano might. The debt is forgiven. Elena's head snapped up. Victor stood in the doorway, still in his suit from the meeting, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. Marcus appeared behind him, phone to his ear coordinating the ambulance. Mr. Romano, the father started, but Victor cut him off with a raised hand. Your debt is forgiven in full. The ambulance will take your daughter to Mass General. I'll call ahead to ensure she receives the best care available regardless of insurance status. All costs will be covered. Victor's voice was calm, controlled, carrying the absolute authority of someone whose word was law. You'll stay with her. Someone from my organization will check on you tomorrow to ensure you both have what you need. The man's face crumpled. I don't understand. Why would you? Because my wife asked me to. Victor's eyes found Elena's, something complicated flickering in their depths. And I don't refuse her requests when a child's life is at stake. Elena hadn't asked, not out loud, but somehow Victor had known exactly what she needed him to do. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Elena gave the paramedics a concise report of Sarah's symptoms and vitals, her nursing training making her an invaluable bridge between the frightened father and medical professionals. She watched them load the little girl into the ambulance, the father climbing in beside her with tears streaming down his face. Then they were gone, and Elena stood in the circular drive with Victor beside her, the weight of what had just happened settling onto her shoulders. You gave away his debt, Elena said quietly. Just like that. Yes. That's probably tens of thousands of dollars. Closer to 40,000. Victor's voice remained neutral. But it was the right thing to do. Elena turned to face him. You did this because I was helping his daughter. I did this because you showed me that sometimes mercy is more valuable than money, that some debts should be forgiven because collecting them would make us monsters. Victor's expression softened. You were right that night in the library. I don't want to be the man who lets children suffer because their parents make bad choices. I want to be better than that. For you. Victor, Elena's voice caught. I know what you're going to say. That one act of mercy doesn't erase everything else. That forgiving one debt doesn't change the nature of my business. And you're right. But Elena, every time you look at me like I might be capable of being good, I want to prove you right. I want to become the man you see when you forget to remember what I am. Elena's chest tightened. This was the danger she'd been afraid of. Not Victor's violence or control, but this, his devastating honesty, his willingness to change himself for her, the way he looked at her like she was the answer to questions he didn't know how to ask. I need you to understand something, Elena said carefully. What you just did, forgiving that debt, helping that child, it wasn't because I asked. It was because deep down, underneath all the armor and violence, you're still the boy who wanted to create beautiful spaces for people to live in. You're still capable of being good, Victor. You just needed permission to remember it. Victor's expression cracked, vulnerability flooding his features. He reached for Elena, pulling her into his arms with a desperation that bordered on crushing. She went willingly, wrapping her arms around his waist, feeling him shake with emotion he couldn't voice. I'm falling apart, he whispered against her hair. You're unmaking everything I built to survive, and I don't know how to stop it. Maybe you don't have to stop it. Elena pulled back enough to see his face. Maybe falling apart is how you start building something new. Something new, Victor repeated like he was testing the words. Something that isn't just survival. Something that might actually be living. Elena lifted her hand to his face, letting her palm rest against his cheek. But, Victor, I need you to understand. This doesn't mean I've forgiven everything. It doesn't mean we're suddenly okay, or that this marriage is what I would have chosen. I know. Victor turned his face into her palm, pressing a kiss to her wrist. But it means you're willing to let me try. to become something better, and that's more than I deserve." They stood there in the afternoon sun, holding each other while the world continued around them. And Elena felt something shift in her chest, not love, not yet, but the first fragile seeds of possibility. That night, Elena found herself in Victor's bed again, without discussion. It had become their unspoken routine, studying in her suite until exhaustion set in, then migrating to Victor's room where he would hold her while she slept. He never pushed for more, never violated the boundaries they'd established, just held her like she was precious, like her presence was enough. But tonight felt different. The residual adrenaline from Sarah's crisis, the weight of Victor's confession in the driveway, the growing awareness that she was starting to care about him beyond simple survival, it all combined into a tension that thrummed between them. Elena lay facing Victor, their faces inches apart in the dim light. His hand rested on her hip, his touch careful but unmistakably possessive. "Tell me what you're thinking," Victor said softly. "I can feel you thinking too hard to sleep." "I'm thinking that I don't know who I am anymore." Elena's admission came out barely above a whisper. "I used to be so clear about right and wrong, good and bad. But now I'm lying in bed with a man who runs a criminal empire, and all I can think about is how much I like the way you hold me, how safe I feel despite knowing I should be terrified, how I'm starting to look forward to breakfast conversations, and the way you remember every small thing I tell you." "Elena, let me finish." She pressed her fingers to his lips, feeling them part in surprise. "I'm falling for you, Victor, not because of the money or the protection or the forced proximity, but because you look at me like I matter more than anything else in your world. Because you let me see the broken parts beneath the armor. Because when I needed you to be good, you didn't hesitate." Victor's breath hitched against her fingers. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "You have no idea what those words mean to me." "Then show me." Elena's pulse hammered. "Show me what it means when I choose you instead of just surviving you." Victor's eyes went dark, his hand tightening on her hip. "Elena, if I kiss you right now, really kiss you, not the careful restraint we've been maintaining, I don't know if I'll be able to stop. You're unraveling my control." "Good." Elena shifted closer, closing the last breath of distance between them. "I don't want your control right now. I want you." The sound Victor made was halfway between a groan and a surrender. Then his mouth was on hers, and this kiss was nothing like the gentle exploration in his study. This was hunger barely leashed, 2 weeks of restrained desire finally given permission. His hand slid from her hip to the small of her back, pulling her flush against him, and Elena gasped at the full-body contact. Victor used the opening to deepen the kiss, his tongue sliding against hers with devastating skill. Elena's hands fisted in his hair, holding him close, giving as good as she got. She felt his restraint fraying, felt the desperation in how he touched her, like he still couldn't quite believe she was allowing this. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "Elena, we need to stop, before I lose the ability to stop." "What if I don't want you to stop?" The words were out before Elena could second-guess them. Victor's whole body went rigid. "Don't say that unless you mean it. Don't offer something you're not ready to give because you think it's expected or because you feel like you owe me." "I don't owe you anything." Elena's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "But I'm choosing to give you this. I'm choosing you, Victor, not because I have to, but because I want to." "Choice," Victor repeated, the word carrying the weight of everything between them. "You're giving me what I stole from you." "Yes." Elena kissed him again, softer this time. "So stop overthinking and just be with me. Let me choose you." What happened next was tender and devastating in equal measure. Victor made love to her like she was something sacred, something he'd been waiting his entire life to be allowed to touch. Every kiss carried reverence. Every touch spoke of desperate gratitude. Every whispered word against her skin was a confession of feelings too big for simple language. And Elena gave herself to him completely, not as payment for debts or surrender to force, but as a gift freely given. She let Victor see her vulnerable, let him know her body as thoroughly as he'd studied her life, let herself fall into sensation without the armor of anger to protect her. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweat slicked and trembling, Victor's arms locked around Elena like he was afraid she'd disappear. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I know I have no right to those words, but I need you to know. I love you more than I thought I was capable of loving anything." Elena's throat tightened. She wasn't ready to say the words back, wasn't sure if what she felt was love or just the beginning of something that might become love. But she could give him truth. "I'm not there yet," she said softly, "but I'm closer than I thought I'd ever be. Ask me again in a month. Ask me when I've had time to separate gratitude from genuine feeling. I'll ask you every day for the rest of my life if that's what it takes." Victor kissed her temple. "I can be patient. I've been patient for 2 years. What's a few more months if it means you might choose to love me back?" They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, two broken people finding unexpected wholeness and connection. And Elena dreamed of buildings with soaring ceilings and spaces designed for beauty instead of function, of a life that might be possible if they could just hold on to this fragile thing they were building. But in the darkness beyond the estate walls, forces were already moving that would test whether what they had could survive the violence Victor's world demanded. Whether choosing each other was enough when the cost of that choice meant becoming targets for everyone who wanted to see Victor Romano fall. The warning came 3 days later in the form of Marcus Chen's grim expression and the assembled security team crowding Victor's study at 7 in the morning. Elena had been making coffee in the kitchen when Mrs. Chen appeared, her usual composure cracked by barely controlled fear. "Mrs. Romano, you need to come with me now." Elena's nursing training kicked in. Assess, don't panic, move with purpose. She followed Mrs. Chen through hallways that suddenly felt too long, too exposed, arriving at Victor's study to find him standing behind his desk in yesterday's clothes, his expression carved from stone. "What happened?" Elena asked, her voice steadier than her pulse. Victor's eyes found hers, and the naked fear she saw there made her stomach drop. "The Volkov family knows about you. They know you matter to me, and they've made it clear that taking you would be the fastest way to destroy everything I've built." Marcus stepped forward, placing photographs on the desk. Elena moved closer despite the dread pooling in her gut. The images showed her, leaving the estate gates for her clinical rotation at Mass General, walking through the hospital parking garage, studying in the library through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Every photograph had been taken within the last 48 hours by someone who'd gotten close enough to kill her if they'd wanted to. "They're making a point," Victor said, his voice deadly calm in the way that suggested violence barely leashed. "They can reach you whenever they want. The security I have in place isn't enough. So what do we do?" Elena forced herself to look at the images, to face the reality of being marked for violence. "I'm moving you to a safe house. Somewhere they can't find, with triple the security." Victor's tone brooked no argument. "You'll stay there until I've neutralized the threat." "No!" The word came out sharp and certain. Victor's head snapped up. "Elena, this isn't negotiable. Your life is in danger." "Then my life has been in danger since my father first borrowed money from your organization." Elena moved around the desk, forcing Victor to look at her instead of the photographs. "You said I was a target whether I was here or not. Running to a safe house just means living in a different cage while you handle this alone." "That's exactly what it means. And that's what's going to happen." Victor's jaw tightened. "I won't risk you. And I won't let you face this without me." Elena planted her hands on the desk, leaning forward. "You told me I wasn't a possession, that you wanted me to choose this life, choose you. Well, I'm choosing. And what I'm choosing is to stay here, in our home, and help you find a better solution than just hiding me away." "There is no better solution. The Volkovs are sending a message that they're willing to escalate. That means I need to respond with overwhelming force before they actually move against you." "Which means what? You're going to start a war?" Elena's voice rose despite her effort to stay calm. "Kill people, risk your own life, potentially destroy everything you've built, all because I became a weakness someone wants to exploit?" "Yes." No hesitation. "I would burn my entire empire to ash if it meant keeping you safe." The declaration should have been romantic. Instead, it terrified Elena because she heard the absolute truth in Victor's voice. He would destroy himself, his organization, everything he'd built from the ashes of his father's death, all to protect her. That's not love, Victor. That's obsession. Elena's hands trembled. And I won't be responsible for you becoming the monster everyone already thinks you are. Victor flinched like she'd struck him. What would you have me do? Wait for them to take you? Let them use you against me? Stand by while they... He couldn't finish, his control cracking. I can't, Elena. I can't lose you. Then don't lose yourself trying to save me. Elena moved around the desk, taking Victor's face in her hands and forcing him to meet her eyes. There has to be another way. Something that doesn't require you to become what you've been trying not to be. Marcus cleared his throat quietly. Actually, there might be. Both Victor and Elena turned to look at him. Marcus straightened under their combined attention, his expression thoughtful. The Volkovs are making this move because they think Mrs. Romano is a secret, a vulnerability you've been hiding. But what if we do the opposite? What if we make her visible, make it clear that she's not a hostage to be taken, but a partner who's chosen this life? You want to paint an even bigger target on her back? Victor's voice was dangerous. I want to change the nature of the target. Marcus pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. If Elena is seen as an active participant in the Romano family business, not the criminal side, but the legitimate operations, then taking her becomes an act of war against someone with her own power base, not just an attack on your weakness. Elena's mind raced, seeing where Marcus was going. You want me to become public, to step out of the shadows. More than that, I want you to become untouchable by being too visible to touch. Marcus looked at Victor. You've been keeping the charitable foundation quiet, using it as a tax shelter and occasionally making donations. But what if we made it Mrs. Romano's project? She establishes a healthcare initiative for underserved communities, makes public appearances, builds relationships with politicians and media. She becomes someone who matters in her own right. That makes her a bigger target, Victor said flatly. No, it makes her a different kind of target, one that's too politically complicated to touch. Marcus's voice carried conviction. Right now, the Volkovs see her as a civilian you're protecting. But if she's running a major charitable foundation, appearing in newspapers, shaking hands with the governor, they can't just snatch her off the street. The blowback would be massive. The attention would make their usual methods impossible. Elena felt something click into place. You're saying I fight back by becoming too important to disappear. Exactly. And in the process, you might actually do some good. Marcus gestured to the photographs. These were taken because you were vulnerable and isolated. Make yourself neither, and the whole equation changes. Victor was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Elena could see him running scenarios, assessing risks, fighting against every instinct that said to hide her away and eliminate threats through violence. It's too dangerous, he said finally. More dangerous than starting a war with the Volkovs? Elena challenged. More dangerous than you going after them and potentially getting yourself killed? Because that's the alternative, Victor. You said yourself they're escalating. We can't unring this bell. We can only change how we respond to it. And if they move against you anyway, if they decide the risk is worth it, then I'll have security with me. Marcus has people who know how to protect someone in public, not just lock them in a fortress. Elena's hands tightened on Victor's face. But Victor, I need you to trust me on this. I need you to believe I can be strong enough to handle this. I know you're strong enough. That's not what I'm worried about. Victor's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I'm worried that I'm not strong enough to watch you put yourself at risk. That I'll see a threat and lose control, and everything we've built together will shatter because I couldn't let you be in danger. Elena's chest ached at the raw fear in his voice. This was what loving her cost Victor. The constant terror of loss, the awareness that his feelings made him vulnerable in ways no amount of power could protect against. Then we learned together, she said softly, echoing words from weeks ago. We learn how to do this without destruction, how to face threats without losing ourselves. Victor closed his eyes, his hands coming up to cover hers where they still cupped his face. When he opened them again, Elena saw resignation and determination warring in their depths. If we do this, we do it properly. Full security detail whenever you leave the estate, armored vehicles, background checks on everyone you interact with. I want Marcus coordinating everything personally. Victor's voice hardened with each requirement. And at the first sign that this isn't working, that you're in actual danger, you go to the safe house. No arguments. Deal. Elena rose on her toes to kiss him, soft and quick. Now tell me about this charitable foundation. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity that left Elena's head spinning. The Romano Foundation, previously a shell operation for tax purposes, was restructured with Elena as its public face and director. Lawyers drew up proper bylaws, accountants allocated actual funding, and Elena found herself with a staff of 5 dedicated to implementing her vision for healthcare access in underserved communities. She poured herself into the work with the same intensity she'd brought to her nursing studies. Mobile health clinics for neighborhoods without easy hospital access, partnerships with medical schools to forgive debt for graduates willing to work in community health, a prescription assistance program for patients who couldn't afford their medications. Victor provided resources without question, watching Elena transform his money laundering operation into something that might actually save lives. She caught him sometimes, standing in doorways while she worked, his expression complex with emotions she was learning to read: pride, fear, love, and something that looked almost like awe. "You're doing what I never could," he said one evening, finding her buried in grant proposals at the desk in their bedroom. Their bedroom now, not just his. Elena had moved her things from the East Wing weeks ago without discussion, and Victor had made space for her like he'd been waiting his whole life to share his most private sanctuary. "What's that?" Elena asked, stretching muscles sore from hours of sitting. "Making something good from my empire." Victor moved behind her chair, his hands settling on her shoulders and kneading the tension with surprising skill. "I've spent 15 years building power and telling myself it was necessary for protection. But you took that power and turned it into something that actually helps people. It's your money funding it. Money I made from gambling and protection rackets and investments in businesses that pay me to look the other way." Victor's hand stilled. "Elena, I'm not deluding myself about what I am, but watching you take the worst parts of my life and create something beautiful from them, it makes me think maybe I haven't completely corrupted everything I touch." Elena turned in her chair to face him. "You haven't corrupted me?" "Haven't I? You're using my blood money to fund healthcare initiatives. You're standing beside me in public as my wife, legitimizing everything I do. How is that not corruption?" "Because I'm choosing it with full knowledge of what it means." Elena stood, taking Victor's hands. "I'm not naive anymore, Victor. I know where the money comes from. I know what you do to maintain your power. And I've decided that if I can take those resources and use them to help people who need it, then that's worth the moral complexity." That's a dangerous philosophy. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way to create change in a world that's already morally gray. Elena squeezed his hands. "I'm not asking you to become a saint. I'm just asking you to let me use your power for something good, to let this marriage be about more than just protection and possession." Victor pulled her close, his arms coming around her with the familiar desperation that suggested he still couldn't quite believe she was real. "You're going to transform everything, aren't you? My business, my life, me. Is that so terrible?" "Terrifying, but not terrible." Victor pressed a kiss to her temple. "Just promise me something." "What?" "If this becomes too much, if the danger, the publicity, the constant scrutiny gets to be more than you can handle, you'll tell me. You won't just endure it because you think you have to." "I promise." Elena tilted her face up for a proper kiss. "Now come to bed. We have that meeting with the hospital board in the morning, and I need to be sharp." "You're always sharp." But Victor let her pull him toward the bed, toward the life they were building together, one careful choice at a time. The Foundation's official launch event was scheduled for a Friday evening at one of Boston's premier hotels. Elena had fought for a more modest venue, but Victor had been immovable on this point. If they were making her public, they were doing it in a way that screamed power and legitimacy. The guest list read like a who's who of Boston society and politics. State senators, hospital administrators, business leaders, and carefully vetted media representatives. Marcus had personally approved every name, running background checks that probably violated a dozen privacy laws. Elena stood in front of the bedroom mirror, smoothing down the deep blue gown Victor had commissioned for the occasion. It was elegant without being ostentatious, the kind of dress that suggested quiet wealth and serious purpose. Her hair was swept up, minimal jewelry except for the platinum wedding band she'd stopped resenting weeks ago. "You look perfect." Victor appeared behind her, devastating in a black tuxedo that probably cost more than a car. "Like you were born to stand in rooms full of powerful people and make them listen." "I feel like I'm about to throw up." "That's normal. I feel that way before every major negotiation." Victor's hand settled on her shoulders, his touch grounding. "But Elena, you're going to be brilliant. These people will love you because you're genuine in a world full of performance. You actually believe in what you're doing." "Do you?" Elena met his eyes in the mirror. "Believe in what we're doing?" "I believe in you. That's enough." Victor pressed a kiss to her bare shoulder. "Ready?" "No, but let's do this anyway." The hotel ballroom was stunning, all glittering chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Elena's hand tightened on Victor's arm as they made their entrance, feeling hundreds of eyes turn their direction. She recognized faces from news broadcasts, from hospital board meetings, from the social pages of newspapers she'd never had time to read. This was Victor's world, power and influence dressed up in evening wear and polite conversation. But tonight, Elena was claiming space in it as more than just his wife. The evening passed in a blur of introductions and carefully rehearsed talking points about the Foundation's mission. Elena found her rhythm after the first few conversations, her genuine passion for healthcare access cutting through the usual social script. Politicians asked thoughtful questions. Hospital administrators offered partnerships. Donors opened their checkbooks with enthusiasm that suggested the Romano name carried weight beyond just criminal reputation. And through it all, Victor remained at her side, supportive but not controlling, present but not overshadowing. He let Elena shine, let her be the center of attention, his pride in her evident in every glance. "Mrs. Romano, I have to say I'm impressed." The speaker was Senator Patricia Hayes, a woman whose anti-corruption platform had made her popular with voters and feared by people like Victor. "When I heard about this foundation, I assumed it was the usual charity washing operation. But you clearly have actual expertise and genuine commitment." Elena felt Victor tense beside her, but kept her expression pleasant. "Thank you, Senator. Healthcare access isn't a pet project for me. It's what I've dedicated my career to. The foundation is just a way to make that work possible on a larger scale. And the fact that it's funded by your husband's considerably gray area business ventures doesn't concern you?" The directness of the question would have rattled Elena weeks ago. Now she met the senator's eyes steadily. "My husband's business is his business. The foundation's work is mine. I can't change where the money came from, but I can determine where it goes. And if I can use those resources to provide health care to people who desperately need it, I'm going to do that without apology." Senator Hayes studied her for a long moment, then smiled with what looked like genuine approval. "You know what, Mrs. Romano? I think we're going to work well together. My office will contact you next week about co-sponsoring some healthcare legislation I'm drafting." After she walked away, Victor leaned close to murmur in Elena's ear, "You just won over one of my biggest political enemies. That was impressive and slightly terrifying." "She's not your enemy if I'm working with her," Elena pointed out. "That's the whole point of this, remember? Changing the equation." "You're enjoying this." Victor sounded somewhere between amused and amazed. "Actually enjoying being in the spotlight." Elena considered that. "Not the spotlight exactly, but the opportunity to do real good with real resources? Yes, I'm enjoying that very much." The rest of the evening reinforced that realization. Elena discovered she had a gift for navigating these social waters. Her nursing background gave her credibility, her genuine passion disarmed skeptics, and her association with Victor opened doors that would have remained closed to a random nursing student with good intentions. By the time they returned to the estate past midnight, Elena was exhausted but energized in equal measure. She kicked off her heels in the bedroom, groaning with relief as her feet hit the carpet. "Remind me never to wear those particular shoes again." Victor caught her around the waist from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "You were magnificent tonight. Every person in that room was captivated by you." "They were captivated by the Romano Foundation's budget," Elena corrected, but she leaned into Victor's embrace. "Though I admit, it felt good. making connections, finding partners who actually care about this work. Senator Hayes practically pledged allegiance to you. Victor's voice carried a hint of dark humor. I've been trying to get her to take a meeting with me for 3 years. You had her eating out of your hand in 10 minutes. That's because I'm not trying to buy her or threaten her. I'm just asking her to help me do something she already believes in. Elena turned in Victor's arms. This is going to work, isn't it? Marcus's plan to make me too visible to touch. It's already working. I had 3 different associates message me tonight asking if they could contribute to the foundation. These are men who've never done anything charitable in their lives, but they understand that being seen supporting you is politically smart. Victor's expression grew serious. The Volkovs are watching too. Marcus's intelligence says they're reassessing their approach. Good. Elena started removing her jewelry, the weight of the evening settling on her shoulders. I'm tired of being afraid, tired of living in a fortress and seeing threats in every shadow. The threats are still real, Elena. Victor helped her with the necklace clasp, his fingers gentle against her nape. Tonight was successful, but it doesn't mean we can be careless. I know, but Victor, for the first time since you forced this marriage, I feel like I have some control. Like I'm not just surviving what you made me. I'm building something of my own. Elena met his eyes in the mirror. Does that scare you, that I'm becoming powerful in my own right? Victor was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on her shoulders. It should terrify me. Power in someone else's hands is always a risk. But with you? He turned her to face him. With you, it makes me feel less alone. Like maybe I don't have to carry everything by myself anymore. The vulnerability in his voice made Elena's chest ache. She pulled Victor down for a kiss that started tender and quickly deepened into something more urgent. They made love with the desperation of people who'd come too close to losing each other, who'd faced threats and found strength in partnership instead of isolation. Afterward, tangled together in the darkness, Elena felt Victor's fingers tracing absent patterns on her back. I have something to tell you, he said quietly, and I need you to hear all of it before you react. Elena's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. Okay. The man whose debt you helped me forgive. Sarah's father. He came to see me yesterday. Victor's voice was carefully controlled. He wanted to thank me, to offer his services, anything to repay what I'd done for his daughter. What did you tell him? I told him the debt was forgiven, that I expected nothing in return. But Elena... Victor paused. He insisted on showing his gratitude somehow. So I offered him a job. Legitimate work. Warehouse management for one of my shipping operations. Good pay, benefits, the ability to support his family without debt hanging over him. Elena pulled back to see Victor's face in the dim light. That was kind of you. It was strategic. Victor's honesty remained unflinching. Because when word got out that I'd not only forgiven his debt but given him employment, 3 other men who owed me money came forward. They asked if the same terms might apply to them. Forgiveness in exchange for legitimate work. A chance to get out from under crushing interest and fear. And? Elena's pulse quickened, seeing where this was going. And I said yes. To all of them. Victor's expression was complex. Do you understand what you've done? You've shown me a different way to maintain loyalty. Not through fear and debt, but through opportunity and mercy. It's not the full solution. I can't just forgive every debt and expect my organization to remain solvent. But for the small-time borrowers, the desperate men who made bad choices but aren't real criminals, this gives them a way out. Elena's throat tightened. You're changing, really changing. You're changing me, whether I want you to or not. Victor pulled her close again. And the terrifying thing is that it feels right. Like maybe I've been doing this wrong for 15 years, and it took you showing up to make me see it. It's not all changing, though, is it? Elena forced herself to ask the hard question. You're still running gambling operations, still collecting from people who can't pay, still using violence when someone crosses you. Yes. No lies. I'm trying to be better, Elena, but I can't transform my entire organization overnight. There are too many people who depend on the current structure. Too many enemies who would see reform as weakness and move against me. But I'm looking for ways to shift, to move more money into legitimate businesses, to reduce the harm I cause while still maintaining enough power to protect what's mine. What's yours meaning me, meaning you, the people who work for me, the territories I control. All of it. Victor's voice hardened slightly. I won't apologize for wanting to keep you safe, Elena. I won't pretend that my motivations are purely altruistic, but I'm trying to find a middle ground between the monster I've had to be and the man you make me want to become. Elena absorbed that, recognizing the truth in it. Victor wasn't going to become some reformed saint, but he was genuinely trying to be less of a villain. And maybe that was all she could reasonably ask for from someone whose entire life had been shaped by violence and survival. Then I'll take the progress and keep pushing for more, she said finally. But Victor, you need to understand, the foundation, the public work I'm doing, it can't be tainted by your criminal operations. If my healthcare initiatives get connected to drug trafficking or violent crime, everything we're building falls apart. I know, that's why I've been careful to keep those worlds separate. Victor's jaw tightened. It's also why I've been restructuring, moving away from the high-risk operations that are most likely to draw federal attention. It's slow and it's costly, but I'm doing it. For me? For us. Because I want a future where I'm not constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, where maybe our children won't have to grow up afraid of who their father is. The casual mention of children made Elena's breath catch. Children? We've never talked about children, Victor tensed. I shouldn't have said that. No. Elena pressed her fingers to his lips. Don't take it back. I want to know what you imagine for our future. Victor was quiet for so long, Elena thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a yearning that made her chest ache. I imagine a life where you run the foundation and I run increasingly legitimate businesses, where we attend galas and hospital fundraisers, and the worst scandal about us is that we're too affectionate in public. I imagine children who inherit your kindness and my stubbornness, who grow up safe and loved and never have to wonder if their father is going to come home. I imagine being able to love you openly without it making you a target. I imagine peace, Elena. After 15 years of war, I imagine peace. Tears burned Elena's eyes. I want that too. I want it so much it terrifies me. Then let's build it. One day at a time, one choice at a time. You transform my blood money into healthcare. I transform my empire into something our children won't have to be ashamed of. We keep pushing toward something better. Together, Elena whispered. Together, Victor confirmed, sealing the promise with a kiss. The attack came 2 weeks later, sudden and brutal, and exactly the kind of escalation Marcus had warned about. Elena was leaving Mass General after her clinical rotation, Marcus and 2 other security personnel flanking her in the parking garage. The first Elena knew something was wrong was Marcus suddenly shoving her behind a concrete pillar, his body a shield as gunfire erupted through the space. The next 90 seconds were chaos. Marcus returning fire while shouting commands into his radio. The security team engaging attackers Elena couldn't see. The acrid smell of gunpowder and the metallic taste of terror. Elena pressed herself against the concrete, her nursing training screaming at her to run toward the wounded while survival instinct kept her frozen. Then Victor's voice, sharp with command. Status! 3 hostiles down, 1 retreating. Mrs. Romano is secure. Marcus's voice was steady despite the violence. We need extraction now. Elena heard more gunfire, then sudden silence. Strong hands pulled her upright. Victor, his face a mask of controlled fury, checking her for injuries with hands that trembled slightly despite their efficiency. You're hit, Elena said, seeing blood on his sleeve. Graze. Not important. Victor's eyes were wild, barely controlled. We're leaving, now. The drive back to the estate was tense and silent. Victor held Elena against his side, his arm like iron around her shoulders, his jaw clenched so tight she could see muscles jumping. Marcus coordinated cleanup and intelligence gathering via phone, his professional calm a stark contrast to Victor's barely leashed violence. Inside the house, Victor pulled Elena straight to their bedroom, locking the door and then rounding on her with an expression she'd never seen before. Rage and terror and desperate relief all warring for dominance. You were almost killed. His voice shook. If Marcus hadn't seen them first, If the security hadn't been exactly where they were supposed to be, but they were, I'm fine. Elena reached for him, but Victor pulled back. This was the Volkovs, making good on their threat because we made you visible instead of hiding you away. Victor's hands clenched into fists. I'm calling it off. The foundation, the public appearances, all of it. You're going to the safe house until I've eliminated every member of their organization. No. Elena's voice was firm despite her racing heart. Elena, this isn't a negotiation. You were shot at. They tried to kill you. And they failed because your security worked exactly like it was supposed to, because Marcus was prepared, because we knew this might happen and we planned for it. Elena moved closer, forcing Victor to look at her. This doesn't change anything except proving we need better security at the hospital. It changes everything. Victor's control finally broke, his voice rising. I can't lose you. I won't survive it. So if keeping you alive means locking you in a fortress and burning the Volkov family to ash, that's what I'm going to do. And what about what I want? Elena's voice matched his in intensity. I'm not a doll you can lock away for safekeeping, Victor. I'm your wife, your partner. And I'm telling you that I won't let them win by making me hide. This isn't about winning. This is about you being alive. It's about both. Elena grabbed Victor's face, forcing him to focus on her instead of his spiraling fear. Yes, I was terrified. Yes, being shot at was the most horrible 90 seconds of my life. But Victor, if we let them push me back into hiding, everything we've built, the foundation, my public presence, the protection that visibility gives me, all of it was for nothing. I don't care about any of that. I only care about you. Then care about what I need, which is to keep building the life we've started. To keep moving forward instead of letting fear make us retreat. Elena's voice softened. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But we can't live our lives controlled by what they might do. Victor's expression crumbled, the controlled facade shattering completely. He pulled Elena against him with bruising force, his face buried in her hair, his whole body shaking. I can't lose you, he whispered. I survived my father's death. I survived 15 years of violence and betrayal. But Elena, I won't survive losing you. You've become too essential. You're the only thing keeping me human. Then trust me to keep myself alive. Trust your security. Trust that we're stronger together than they are. Elena held him just as tightly. And Victor? Make them regret this. Not by burning their organization to ash, but by proving that we can survive their worst and come back stronger. Victor pulled back, and Elena saw the exact moment when his fear transformed into cold calculation. The criminal mastermind reasserting control over the terrified man who'd almost lost the woman he loved. You want them to regret it? Fine. But we do this my way. Victor's voice dropped to that dangerous calm that suggested violence was about to be deployed with surgical precision. Marcus, get in here. Marcus entered immediately, as if he'd been waiting just outside the door. Sir? I want a complete threat assessment on the Volkov family. Every member, every associate, every business they run. And I want proposals for surgical strikes that cripple their operations without starting an all-out war. Victor's arm remained locked around Elena. They tried to kill my wife. They need to understand the cost of that mistake. Already working on it. We identified the shooters from security footage. 2 are dead, 1 is in custody. Marcus's expression was grim. They're low-level contractors. The Volkovs are insulating themselves with deniability. Then we remove the insulation, find their weak points. Accounts I can freeze, operations I can expose, family members who might be persuaded to see reason. Victor's jaw tightened. I want them to feel the consequences without giving them an excuse to escalate further. And Mrs. Romano's security? Triple it. I want a full team on her at all times when she leaves the estate. Armored vehicles, advance routes, the works. Victor looked at Elena. You want to keep going to the hospital? Keep running the foundation? Fine. But you do it with enough security that an army couldn't touch you. Elena nodded, recognizing this was as much compromise as she was going to get. Agreed. The next week was a masterclass in controlled destruction. Elena watched Victor dismantle the Volkov family's operations with the precision of a surgeon removing cancer. bank accounts frozen through connections she didn't want to know about, shipments intercepted by suddenly vigilant customs officials, business partners who mysteriously decided the Volkovs were too high risk to work with. No bodies, no overt violence, just the steady, inexorable dismantling of an empire by someone who understood exactly where the pressure points were. And through it all, Elena continued her work. Hospital rotations with a security team that made other doctors do double takes. Foundation meetings where Marcus's people swept rooms for threats before she entered. Public appearances carefully choreographed to minimize risk while maximizing visibility. Senator Hayes's office called with the promised health care legislation, and Elena threw herself into supporting it. Testimony at committee hearings, meetings with advocacy groups, media interviews where she spoke passionately about healthcare access, and carefully avoided any mention of her husband's business. She was becoming exactly what Marcus had envisioned. Too important, too visible, too politically connected to simply disappear. And in the process, she was discovering that she had a talent for this work that went beyond just her nursing background. 2 months after the parking garage attack, Victor called Elena into his study with an expression she couldn't quite read. When she entered, she found him holding a tablet displaying a news article. "The Volkovs are done," he said without preamble. Dmitry Volkov is negotiating a plea deal with federal prosecutors on RICO charges. His organization is collapsing. They're not a threat anymore. Elena felt something tight in her chest finally release. How? "I may have provided certain evidence to certain federal agents, along with testimony from people who suddenly found their conscience after the Volkovs could no longer protect them." Victor's expression was carefully neutral. "It's cleaner this way. They go to prison, their organization dissolves, and I don't have their blood on my hands. You destroyed them without killing anyone. I destroyed them the way you would have wanted me to, with strategy instead of violence." Victor set down the tablet. "It doesn't make me a good man, Elena. I still used illegal methods, still manipulated the legal system, still ruined lives, but at least no one died." Elena moved around the desk, understanding the significance of what Victor was telling her. He'd found a way to eliminate a threat without becoming the monster he'd spent 15 years trying to not be, for her. Because she'd asked him to be better. "This is progress," she said softly. "This is survival with slightly less bloodshed." Victor pulled her into his lap, his arms coming around her with familiar possessiveness. "Don't make me a hero for choosing prison over murder, Elena. The bar should be higher than that." "The bar is higher, and you're working toward meeting it." Elena kissed him, soft and lingering. "I'm proud of you." Victor's expression cracked, vulnerability flooding through the careful control. "Say that again." "I'm proud of you. For finding another way. For trying to be better even when it's harder." Elena cupped his face in her hands. "And Victor, I love you." The words hung in the air between them, significant because Elena had finally reached the point where she could say them with certainty. Not gratitude dressed up as affection, not Stockholm Syndrome masquerading as love. Actual love for the complicated, dangerous, surprisingly tender man who'd forced his way into her life and then spent months proving he could be worthy of her choice to stay. "Elena," Victor's voice broke. "I love you," she repeated. "Not despite who you are, but because I've seen who you're trying to become, because you gave me partnership instead of possession, because you're learning to choose mercy when violence would be easier. I love you, Victor Romano, completely. Finally. Without reservation." Victor kissed her like she was air and he was drowning, like those words were the only thing keeping him tethered to humanity. And when they eventually came up for air, his eyes were wet with unshed tears. "I've been waiting 2 years to hear you say that. I know, I needed to be sure it was real." Elena smiled. "But it is. This is real. What we've built together. It's real." "Then marry me." Victor's voice was soft but certain. "Really marry me. Not the forced ceremony in a church you hated. A real wedding, where you choose me freely. Where we make vows that mean something because you're giving them willingly." Elena's breath caught. "We're already married. Legally. But Elena, I want you to marry me because you want to. Because you love me. and you're choosing this life with full knowledge of what it means. I want to kneel before you and ask you to be my wife, and have you say yes because you mean it." The idea settled into Elena's chest with surprising rightness, a chance to reclaim what had been stolen, to transform forced vows into chosen promises, to stand before witnesses and declare her love instead of her resignation. "Yes," she whispered, "ask me." Victor slid from the chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. His eyes held hers, dark and intense and full of desperate hope. "Elena Carter Romano, will you marry me? Not because of debts or threats or force, but because we've built something worth keeping. Because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Because you've transformed my life in ways I never imagined. Will you choose me, knowing everything you know? Will you be my wife not as a cage, but as a partnership we build together?" Elena's eyes burned with happy tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Victor surged up to kiss her, and they sealed the promise there in his study, surrounded by evidence of the empire he was slowly transforming into something they could both live with. The second wedding took place 6 weeks later in a garden ceremony that felt like the opposite of their first. Intimate instead of forced, joyful instead of terrifying, chosen instead of compelled. Elena wore a dress she'd selected herself, simple ivory lace that made her feel beautiful instead of like a doll being dressed for display. Mrs. Chen cried. Marcus served as best man with obvious pride. Senator Hayes attended, along with hospital administrators, foundation staff, and a carefully curated selection of guests who represented the life Elena and Victor were building together. Legitimate, visible, hopeful. And when the officiant asked if Elena took Victor to be her husband, she said yes with a voice that carried absolute certainty. When Victor slipped a new ring onto her finger, a delicate band with small diamonds that caught the light, his hands were steady. "I married you twice," he whispered during their first dance. "The first time I stole your choice. The second time you gave it freely. Thank you for giving me a second chance." "Thank you for becoming someone worth giving it to," Elena whispered back. They danced surrounded by people who mattered, in a garden Victor had designed himself using the architecture skills he'd thought he'd lost forever. The house behind them was being renovated to incorporate more of his drawings, spaces designed for beauty and light instead of just function and security. The foundation was thriving, with 3 mobile health clinics now operating and legislation pending that would expand Medicaid coverage in ways that could help thousands. Victor's businesses were becoming increasingly legitimate, the violence and criminal operations slowly being replaced by legal enterprises that generated wealth without requiring moral compromise. It wasn't perfect. There were still threats, still danger, still aspects of Victor's empire that Elena couldn't examine too closely. But they were moving in the right direction, building something together that acknowledged the darkness while reaching toward light. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Victor pulled Elena close on the dance floor that had been set up in their garden. "Happy?" he asked softly. Elena looked around at the life they'd created, by force initially, but increasingly by choice. At the foundation that bore her vision, the guests who respected her work, the husband who'd learned to value her agency as much as his desire to protect her. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm happy." And she was. Not in the uncomplicated way of fairy tales, but in the complex, hard-won way of people who'd fought for every inch of common ground, who'd started with violence and force and somehow, impossibly, found their way to partnership and love. Victor had stolen her life 2 years ago in a parking lot, and then again at a forced wedding. But in the months since, Elena had stolen pieces of him too. His certainty, his willingness to use violence as a first resort, his belief that he was beyond redemption. They'd transformed each other, criminal and healer, captor and captive, eventually becoming something neither had expected, partners navigating impossible circumstances, and finding that love could grow even in soil fertilized by broken choices and stolen agency. As night fell and Victor led her inside their home, Elena looked back once at the garden where they'd married for the second time, where she'd chosen him freely after everything. Some loves were simple and easy, some were complicated and earned, and some began in darkness but found their way to light through sheer stubborn determination to become better than what circumstances demanded. Elena had all 3 now. The simple love of partnership. The complicated love of truly knowing someone's flaws and choosing them anyway. And the hard-won love of transformation, two broken people forging something whole from the shattered pieces of what they'd been. She wouldn't have chosen this path if given the option 2 years ago. But standing here now, with Victor's hand in hers, and a future stretching ahead that they could build together, Elena found she wouldn't trade it for anything. Not the forced beginning, not the painful middle, not this chosen ending that was really just a beginning of something new. This was their story. Imperfect, complicated, occasionally dark, but ultimately theirs. Built not from fairy tale romance, but from hard choices and harder compromises. From learning to trust when trust seemed impossible. From finding love in the space between possession and partnership. And as Elena followed Victor inside to the life they'd chosen together, she carried no regrets. Only hope for the future they'd keep building, one day at a time, one choice at a time, together.